Announce the bidding with a cruel grin. Announce the bidding with a cruel grin, treating her family like cattle at market. Dust swirled around the platform as shame burned Clara's cheeks. Then a voice cut through the jeers, low, steady, unfamiliar. A tall rancher stepped forward from the shadows, his weathered face unreadable. "I'll take all 7, he said, and the crowd fell silent. Clara's heart hammered. She didn't know whether she'd just been saved or sold into something worse. Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it touches your heart, hit that like button and stay until the very end. The morning had started with the kind of silence that precedes disaster. Clara Whitmore woke before dawn in the cramped back room of her late husband's family home, her youngest child still asleep against her shoulder. Margaret was only 3, her breathing soft and warm against Clara's neck. Around them, the other 5 children lay tangled in threadbare blankets on the floor. Samuel at 9, trying so hard to be the man of the family. Rose at 8, with her mother's dark hair and worried eyes. The twins Henry and Helen at 6, and little Thomas at 4, who still cried for his father in the night. 4 months. It had been 4 months since Michael Whitmore died in a logging accident up in the timber country, and 4 months since Clara's world collapsed into ash and uncertainty. She hadn't known then how much worse things could get. The door banged open without warning. Clara jerked upright, instinctively pulling Margaret closer. Her brother-in-law Raymond stood in the doorway, his thick frame blocking the early light, his expression carved from stone and cruelty. "Get them up," he said flatly. "Get them dressed. We're leaving in an hour." Clara's throat tightened. "Leaving? Where are we?" "You'll find out soon enough." Raymond's eyes were cold. "Your free ride is over, Clara. My mother's made her decision, and there ain't no arguing with it. 1 hour. Don't make me come back." The door slammed shut. Margaret whimpered, and Clara held her tighter, her mind racing through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Raymond's mother, old Judith Whitmore, the iron-fisted matriarch who'd barely acknowledged Clara's existence even when Michael was alive, had been making noises for weeks about the burden of feeding 7 extra mouths, about how Clara needed to contribute or move along. But where could they go? Clara had no family of her own, no money, no prospects. Michael's wages had died with him. She dressed the children in terrified silence, her hands shaking as she buttoned Thomas's shirt. Samuel watched her with eyes too old for his 9 years. "Mama, what's happening?" "I don't know, sweetheart." Clara tried to keep her voice steady. "But we'll face it together, whatever it is." Rose began to cry quietly. The twins held hands, their identical faces pale with fear. Clara wanted to comfort them, to promise that everything would be all right. But the words stuck in her throat. She had no idea if anything would ever be all right again. An hour later, they were loaded into the back of Raymond's wagon like cargo. Judith Whitmore sat up front beside her son, her back rigid, never once turning to look at the children bouncing on the hard wooden boards behind her. Clara held Margaret in her lap and tried to keep the others from falling as the wagon rattled down the mountain road toward town. The settlement of Ashford sat in a valley between pine-covered ridges, a collection of rough buildings that served the logging camps and mining claims scattered through the surrounding wilderness. Clara had been here only a handful of times. Michael had preferred to keep to the timber country, close to his work. But as the wagon rolled down the main street, Clara's stomach twisted with growing dread. The town was too crowded for an ordinary morning. People lined the boardwalks, clustered in groups, pointing and talking. Near the center of town, a rough wooden platform had been erected in the street, an auction platform. "No." The word escaped Clara's lips before she could stop it. "No, you can't." "Shut your mouth," Judith said without turning around. "You've got no say in this." Raymond pulled the wagon to a halt beside the platform. The crowd pressed closer, curious and hungry for spectacle. Clara recognized some of the faces, men from the logging camps, shopkeepers, a few rough-looking prospectors. Their eyes crawled over her, and the children with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Get down," Raymond ordered. Clara's legs barely held her as she climbed from the wagon, Margaret clinging to her neck. The other children clustered around her, Samuel trying to put himself between his mother and the crowd, his small fists clenched. Raymond grabbed Clara's arm and hauled her toward the platform. She stumbled, nearly dropping Margaret, and the crowd laughed. The sound cut through her like broken glass. "Please," Clara whispered, "please don't do this." "Should have thought of that before you became a burden." Raymond's breath was hot against her ear. "My mother's been generous, keeping you fed all these weeks. Now it's time you earned your keep, or found someone else to take you off our hands." He shoved her up onto the platform. The children scrambled after her, their faces white with terror. Thomas was crying openly now. Helen had her thumb in her mouth, something she hadn't done in over a year. Rose held on to Clara's skirt so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Judith Whitmore stood at the base of the platform, her face carved from flint. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying across the crowd, "I'm here today to settle a family matter. This woman," she gestured at Clara with contempt, "is my late son's widow. She's got 6 children and no means of supporting them. For 4 months, I've fed and housed them out of Christian charity." Several people in the crowd murmured approvingly. Clara's face burned with humiliation. "But I'm an old woman," Judith continued, "and I can't carry this weight forever. So I'm offering an opportunity. Clara Whitmore is young, healthy, able to work. She can cook, clean, and sew. These children can help with chores. Most of them are old enough to earn their keep. I'm looking for someone willing to take them in, give them work, put a roof over their heads." "You're selling them?" a woman's voice called from the crowd, sharp with disbelief. "I'm arranging for their welfare," Judith said coldly. "There's a difference." But there wasn't. Clara could see it in the eyes of the crowd. "Start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I'm ready to bid." "Very well. The auction will begin in 10 minutes." "I'll start the bidding," Raymond announced. "Do I hear $20? Silence. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable but fascinated. "Come now," Raymond pushed. "That's less than $4 a head for 7 workers. It's a bargain." "The little ones can't work worth a damn," someone called out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara's vision blurred with tears. She pulled her children closer, trying to shield them from the stares and comments. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "They'll grow," Raymond said. "And in the meantime, the woman can work for all of them. $20. Do I hear it?" A man near the front, a prospector Clara didn't recognize, raised his hand. "I'll give you 15 for the woman alone. You can keep the brats." The casual cruelty of it hit Clara like a fist. Samuel made a small, broken sound beside her. Rose's grip on her skirt tightened until Clara thought the fabric would tear. "No," Clara said, her voice shaking. "No, you can't separate us, please." "You're in no position to make demands," Judith said sharply. 20, another voice called. "For the woman and the two oldest. The rest would just be mouths to feed." Clara's knees buckled. She sank down on the platform, gathering all 6 children against her, her arms barely able to encompass them all. Thomas buried his face in her shoulder. Margaret was sobbing. Samuel's whole body trembled with the effort of not crying. "We have 20 for 3, Raymond said. "Do I hear 25 for 4? This was a nightmare. It had to be. Clara closed her eyes, praying she would wake up, that this horror would dissolve into nothing. But when she opened them again, the crowd was still there, still watching, still bidding on her family like they were furniture or tools. 25 for the woman and the oldest boy, someone offered. Samuel made a choked sound. "Mama." "Hush, sweetheart," Clara's voice cracked. "Don't listen. Just hold on to me." The bidding continued, each offer like a knife between her ribs. The twins clinging to each other, Rose trying so hard to be brave. Little Thomas, who didn't understand why strangers were arguing about taking him away from his mama. Clara couldn't breathe. The platform felt like it was tilting beneath her. The faces in the crowd blurred together into a mass of indifferent curiosity and cold calculation. No one was going to help them. No one was going to step forward and say this was wrong, that you couldn't sell human beings in the street like animals. $30, Raymond called. "That's my final offer. $30 for the lot of them, or I take the best offers for individuals. Going once, I'll take all 7. The voice came from the back of the crowd, low and rough as gravel. The crowd shifted, parting like water, and a man stepped through. He was tall and lean, weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. His face was hard-lined and unreadable, his eyes the color of winter sky. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a worn shirt, a leather vest, and moved with the quiet economy of someone accustomed to long silences and empty spaces. Clara had never seen him before in her life. "What was that?" Raymond demanded. The stranger stopped at the base of the platform, his eyes moving over Clara and the children with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. Not hunger, not calculation, something else entirely. "I said I'll take all 7, he repeated. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the purchase of lumber or livestock. "What's your price?" Raymond's eyes narrowed with suspicion and greed. "Who are you?" Caleb Rourke. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she saw recognition flicker through parts of the crowd. Whispers started. "I've got a ranch beyond the valley. I could use the help." "You live alone out there, don't you, Rourke?" someone called. "What do you need with a woman and 6 kids?" Caleb's expression didn't change. "That's my business." He looked back at Raymond. "Name your price." Raymond licked his lips, clearly recalculating. $100. The crowd gasped. It was an outrageous sum, nearly a year's wages for a working man. Clara's heart sank. No one would pay that much. This stranger, whoever he was, would walk away, and the bidding would resume, and her family would be torn apart. Done. Clara's head snapped up. Caleb Rourke was already reaching into his vest, pulling out a leather pouch. He counted out bills with steady hands, more money than Clara had seen in her entire life, and handed it to Raymond without hesitation. The crowd murmured in shock. Raymond stared at the money in his hands as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. Judith's face had gone pale with surprise. Caleb looked up at Clara. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just that connection, his steady gaze and her terrified, desperate hope. "Come down from there," he said quietly. "All of you." Clara didn't move. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that she was trading one danger for another, that a man who lived alone in the wilderness and paid a fortune for a family of strangers had to want something terrible in return. But what choice did she have? Slowly, her children still clustered around her, Clara stood. Her legs shook as she climbed down from the platform. Samuel stayed close to her side, his hand gripping hers. Rose carried Thomas. The twins held on to each other. Margaret clung to Clara's neck like she would never let go. They stood in a small, frightened huddle at the base of the platform. Caleb Rourke looked down at them, his face still unreadable. You have belongings? He asked Clara. She shook her head. Just what we're wearing. Right. He turned to where a wagon stood at the edge of the crowd, a sturdy working vehicle pulled by two strong horses. Get in the wagon, we've got a ways to travel. Clara hesitated, her arms tightening around Margaret. Where are you taking us? For the first time, something shifted in Caleb's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. Home, he said simply. I'm taking you home. Spoke. The ride out of Ashford passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Clara sat in the back of the wagon with the children pressed around her, watching the town disappear behind them. No one spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip of the horses' hooves. Caleb drove without looking back, his broad shoulders straight, his attention on the rough road ahead. They left the valley and climbed into the foothills, following a track that grew narrower and more overgrown as the miles passed. Pine forests closed in on either side. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the advancing spring. Samuel leaned close to Clara's ear. Mama, where is he taking us? I don't know, Clara whispered back, but we have to be brave, Sam. All of us. I'm scared. I know, sweetheart, so am I. The sun climbed toward midday and then began its descent toward afternoon. They passed no other travelers, no settlements, no signs of human habitation. The wilderness pressed in, vast and indifferent. Clara's dread grew with every passing mile. What did she know about this man? Nothing. He could be taking them anywhere, planning anything, but he'd paid for all of them. That thought kept circling through her mind. He could have taken just her, or just the older children who could work. Instead, he'd insisted on all 7. Why? Finally, as the sun touched the western ridges, the wagon crested a rise and a valley opened up below them. It was beautiful. A meadow stretched along a creek that caught the golden light, surrounded by dark pines. At the far end stood a house, a solid log structure with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and several outbuildings scattered around it. Fences marked pastures where cattle grazed. The whole place had an air of careful order, of solitary purpose. Caleb guided the wagon down the slope and pulled up in front of the house. For a long moment, he sat without moving, his hands resting on the reins. Then he climbed down, moving with that same quiet economy of motion. He came around to the back of the wagon and looked up at Clara and the children. In the fading light, his face was shadowed, but his eyes were steady. You'll sleep in the house, he said. There's a back room with 2 beds. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. I'll show you where things are. Clara clutched Margaret tighter. And you? I have a room off the kitchen. He paused. You don't need to be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you or your children. The words should have been reassuring, but Clara had learned long ago that what men said and what they did were often 2 different things. Still, she had no choice but to accept his help, at least for tonight. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long ride. The children followed, huddling close to her. Thomas whimpered. Helen sucked her thumb. Even Samuel, trying so hard to be brave, looked small and lost in the growing darkness. Caleb opened the front door and gestured them inside. The interior was plain but well kept. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a table and chairs. Everything was clean and orderly in a way that spoke of a man who lived alone and took care of his own space. This way. Caleb led them through the kitchen to a door at the back. He opened it to reveal a small room with 2 narrow beds, a chest of drawers, and a window looking out toward the creek. It smelled of wood and dust and disuse. I'll bring in some blankets. There's a wash basin on the porch and an outhouse behind the barn. Clara nodded mutely. Margaret was nearly asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by fear and the long journey. Are you hungry? Caleb asked. The question took Clara by surprise. She hadn't thought about food, but the children hadn't eaten since early morning, and she could see the hunger in their faces even through the fear. Yes, she admitted quietly. Thank you. I'll make something. Caleb turned away, then paused in the doorway. Try to rest. You're safe here. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara stood in the middle of the small room, the children clustered around her, and felt the first tears slip down her cheeks. She'd held them back all day, through the humiliation of the auction, the terror of being sold, the uncertainty of the journey. But now, in this quiet room that smelled of cedar and safety, she couldn't hold them anymore. "Mama, don't cry," Rose whispered, wrapping her arms around Clara's waist. "I'm all right, sweetheart." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm just tired. We all are. Come on, let's sit down." They arranged themselves on the beds, Margaret curled in Clara's lap, the twins on one side, Samuel, Rose, and Thomas on the other. Through the closed door, they could hear Caleb moving around the kitchen, the sound of a pan on the stove, the crackle of a fire being built up. "What's going to happen to us?" Samuel asked in a small voice. Clara stroked his hair. "I don't know yet, but we're together. That's what matters." "Do you think he's nice?" Helen asked around her thumb. "I think," Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think he's given us a place to sleep and promised us food. That's more than we had this morning." It was the best answer she could give. The truth was, she had no idea what Caleb Rourke wanted from them, what he expected in exchange for the fortune he'd paid. Men didn't spend that kind of money out of kindness. There was always a price. The door opened and Clara tensed, but it was only Caleb with an armload of quilts and blankets. He set them on the chest of drawers without comment, then disappeared again. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 bowls of stew and a basket of bread. "It's not fancy," he said, setting them on the chest, "but it's hot." "Thank you," Clara managed. He nodded and left again, pulling the door closed behind him. They ate in silence, sharing the 2 bowls among all of them, the bread passing from hand to hand. The stew was simple, venison and vegetables in a rich broth, but it was the best thing Clara had tasted in months. The children devoured their portions, and color began to return to their pale faces. When the bowls were empty and the last crumbs of bread consumed, Clara spread the blankets over the 2 beds. The children were so exhausted they barely protested as she settled them down, Margaret beside her, the twins sharing the other bed. Samuel, Rose, and Thomas squeezed together at the foot. Within minutes, they were all asleep. Clara lay in the darkness, listening to her children breathe, feeling the warmth of Margaret's small body against her side. Outside, night sounds drifted through the window. Crickets, a distant owl, the soft murmur of the creek. Inside, she could hear Caleb moving around the kitchen, the scrape of a chair, the quiet sounds of a man settling in for the evening. She should sleep. She needed to sleep. But every time she closed her eyes, the day replayed itself. The auction platform, the jeering crowd, the moment Caleb Rourke stepped forward and bought her family for a sum that still seemed impossible. What did he want? What was the price she would have to pay? Clara pulled Margaret closer and stared into the darkness, waiting for answers that didn't come. She woke to the smell of coffee and the soft gray light of dawn. For a moment, Clara couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the auction, the journey, this strange house in the wilderness. She sat up carefully, trying not to disturb Margaret. The other children were still asleep, tangled in blankets, their faces peaceful in a way they hadn't been in months. Clara slipped out of bed and smoothed her dress, the same worn garment she'd been wearing for days. She had nothing else. No brush for her hair, no way to make herself presentable. But she couldn't hide in this room forever. She opened the door as quietly as she could and stepped into the kitchen. Caleb stood at the stove, his back to her, tending a pan of what smelled like bacon. A pot of coffee sat on the side. The morning light through the window caught the gray in his dark hair, the strong line of his shoulders. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who'd cooked his own meals for a long time. Clara cleared her throat softly. "Good morning." He turned, his expression neutral. "Morning. Coffee?" "Yes, thank you." He poured a cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Clara flinched before she could stop herself. If Caleb noticed, he didn't show it. He just turned back to the stove. "The children still sleeping?" "Yes." "Let them rest. We'll eat when they wake up." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup and watched him work. He moved economically, wasting no motion, his attention on the task. The silence stretched, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Finally, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. "Mr. Rourke, Caleb." "Caleb." The name felt strange on her tongue. I need to know, what do you expect from us? From me? He was quiet for a moment, flipping the bacon. Then he said without looking at her, I expect you to help with the work. Cooking, cleaning, mending. The children can help with chores as they're able, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, small things. In return, you'll have a roof over your heads, food on the table, and safety. That's all? Now he did look at her, his winter sky eyes direct and unreadable. That's all. Clara's hands tightened on the coffee cup. Men don't spend $100 for help with chores. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Not anger, but something that might have been understanding. No, he said quietly. They don't. He turned off the stove and set the pan aside. I'm not going to lie to you, Clara. I bought you and your children because I couldn't stand there and watch them split up your family. I couldn't watch them sell you like livestock and do nothing. But why? You don't know us. No. He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. But I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it's like when the world treats you like you don't matter. His gaze was steady. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to force myself on you or mistreat your children. If you want to leave once you've got your feet under you, I won't stop you. But while you're here, you'll be safe. That's my word. Clara wanted to believe him. Everything in his voice, his eyes, his bearing suggested honesty. But she'd been wrong about men before. She thought Michael was strong and capable, and then he died and left her with nothing. She thought his family would help, and they'd sold her on an auction block instead. I don't know if I can trust you, she said, the words barely a whisper. I know, Caleb said. That's all right. Trust takes time. We've got plenty of that. Before Clara could respond, the door to the back room opened, and Samuel appeared, his hair standing up in all directions, his eyes wary. Mama? I'm here, Sam. Clara set down her coffee and went to him, wrapping him in her arms. Everything's all right. One by one, the other children emerged, tousled, sleepy, uncertain. They clustered around Clara in the kitchen, eyeing Caleb with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Caleb regarded them with that same unreadable expression. Then he said, You all hungry? Thomas nodded. Helen whispered, Yes, sir. Well then. Caleb turned back to the stove. Let's eat. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Clara cooked and cleaned and mended, trying to make herself useful, to justify the money Caleb had spent and the space her family occupied. The house had been neglected, not dirty, but sparse and joyless, with the air of a place where no one truly lived, only existed. She scrubbed and swept and organized, bringing order to corners that had been ignored for years. The children, tentative at first, gradually began to explore. Samuel helped Caleb with the cattle, learning to mend fences and carry water. Rose discovered the chickens and took over feeding them, gathering eggs in a basket she wore on her arm like a badge of pride. The twins, Henry and Helen, found joy in the creek, building dams with stones and splashing in the shallows under Clara's watchful eye. Even Thomas and Margaret, the youngest, began to lose some of their fear. Thomas followed Samuel everywhere, trying to copy his older brother's careful competence. Margaret, still shy, watched Caleb from a distance with wide, curious eyes. And Caleb remained a mystery. He was kind without being warm, helpful without being familiar. He worked from dawn to dark, tending his cattle, repairing buildings, clearing brush. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with a quiet authority that the children instinctively respected. He never raised his voice, never showed anger or impatience, even when Thomas accidentally spilled a bucket of water, or Helen left the chicken coop open and the birds scattered across the yard. Clara watched him, trying to understand what kind of man he really was. He'd told her she was safe, and so far, he'd kept that promise. He slept in his room off the kitchen, and never once came to the back room where she and the children slept. He treated her with a formal respect that was almost old-fashioned, never touching her, never standing too close, never saying anything that could be construed as improper. But she could feel his awareness of her, the way his eyes sometimes followed her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with hunger or calculation, but with something else, a quiet, careful interest that made her heart beat faster and her hands go still in their work. It confused her. It frightened her. She didn't know what to do with it. One evening, about 2 weeks after they'd arrived, Clara was washing dishes at the kitchen basin when Caleb came in from the barn. He hung his hat on a peg and went to the stove, pouring himself coffee from the pot that was always kept warm. "Clara," he said, not quite looking at her, "I need to go into Ashford tomorrow for supplies. I was thinking maybe you and the children would like to come. Get out of the valley for a bit." Clara's hands stilled in the dishwater. The thought of going back to Ashford, where people had watched her family being auctioned, where she'd stood on that platform in front of jeering strangers, made her stomach twist. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said quietly. Caleb was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You can't hide here forever. And the children need things. Clothes that fit, shoes, books maybe. We don't have money for those things." "I do." Clara turned to face him, her wet hands dripping on the floor. "You've already done too much. I can't—" "Can't what?" Caleb's voice was gentle. "Can't accept help? Can't let me provide for my household? We're not your household, we're—" She stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. What were they? Employees? Charity cases? The family he'd purchased like livestock? "You're here," Caleb said firmly. "You're under my roof. That makes you my responsibility." He set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "I know it's hard. I know you're used to doing everything yourself, to not depending on anyone. But you don't have to do that here. Let me help." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She turned back to the dishes, blinking them away. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "I know," Caleb said, "but maybe someday you will." They went to Ashford. Clara dressed the children in their best clothes, which wasn't saying much, and tried to do something with her own hair. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, too thin, too worn, with shadows under her eyes and lines of worry around her mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. The ride into town was tense. Samuel sat close to Clara, his hand gripping hers. Rose kept her eyes down. Even the twins were subdued, remembering the last time they'd been in Ashford. But when they arrived, Caleb didn't take them to the main street where the auction had been held. Instead, he drove to a general store on the edge of town, a neat building with whitewashed walls and a sign that read, "Brennan's." A woman looked up as they entered, middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Caleb Rourke," she said in surprise. "Haven't seen you in months. And who's this?" "Mrs. Brennan, this is Clara Whitmore and her children." Caleb gestured to the family clustered in the doorway. "They're staying at my place. They need clothes, shoes, whatever they're short of." Mrs. Brennan's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. Come in, dears, don't be shy." She came around the counter, her smile warm and genuine. "Let's have a look at you." Over the next hour, Mrs. Brennan measured and fitted, bringing out dresses for the girls, shirts and trousers for the boys, shoes that actually fit instead of pinching or flopping. Clara tried to protest the expense, but Caleb simply shook his head and told Mrs. Brennan to add it all to his account. When they were done, the children looked transformed, still thin and wary, but dressed in clean new clothes that fit properly. Margaret spun in a circle, her new dress flaring around her ankles, and laughed out loud, the first time Clara had heard that sound in months. "Thank you," Clara said to Caleb as they loaded the parcels into the wagon. "Thank you so much." He just nodded, a slight softening around his eyes that might have been a smile. As they prepared to leave, a shadow fell across the wagon. Clara looked up and felt her heart stop. Raymond stood there, his face dark with anger. Behind him, old Judith watched with cold, calculating eyes. "Well, well," Raymond said. "Look at you all, dressed up like real people." His eyes raked over Clara with contempt. "Rourke treating you well, is he? Getting his money's worth?" Clara felt the children press against her. Caleb stepped between them and Raymond, his body language utterly calm but somehow menacing in its stillness. "Move along, Raymond," he said quietly. "This is a free street. I'll stand where I like." Raymond's hands clenched into fists. "You think buying them makes them yours? You think that makes you better than us?" "I think it makes them safe from you," Caleb said. "And that's all that matters." For a moment, Clara thought Raymond might swing. His face went red, his whole body tensed, but something in Caleb's eyes, something hard and unflinching, made him hesitate. "This ain't over," Raymond spat. "You can't just steal a man's family. They were never yours." Caleb's voice was soft but edged with steel. You put them on an auction block. You sold them to the highest bidder. That was me. Now they're mine to protect, and if you come near them again, you'll answer to me. The threat hung in the air between them. Finally, Raymond stepped back, his face twisted with impotent rage. Come on, mother, he muttered, and they disappeared into the crowd. Clara realized she was shaking. Caleb turned to her, his expression gentling. Get in the wagon, he said quietly. Let's go home. Home. The word resonated strangely in Clara's chest as they rattled out of town, the children clutching their packages of new clothes, Caleb steady and silent on the driver's seat. Maybe, just maybe, it could be. The encounter with Raymond left a shadow over the ranch that lingered for days. Clara found herself watching the road, tensing at every distant sound, half expecting to see him and Judith come riding up the valley with demands or threats. But the days passed quietly, filled with the rhythms of work and the gradual softening of fear. Spring deepened into early summer. The meadow bloomed with wildflowers, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from the mountains. The children grew stronger, their hollow cheeks filling out with regular meals, their movements losing that hunted wariness that had defined them in the early days. Samuel took to ranch life with an intensity that sometimes worried Clara. He shadowed Caleb constantly, absorbing every word, every demonstration of how to work leather or mend tack or read the weather in the shape of clouds over the peaks. He was desperate to be useful, to prove his worth, and Clara recognized the fear beneath it, the terror that if they weren't valuable enough, they'd be cast out again. One morning, she found him in the barn before dawn, struggling to lift a saddle that was far too heavy for his 9-year-old frame. His face was red with effort, his hands shaking. Sam, what are you doing? Clara took the saddle from him and set it on its rack. That's too much for you. I can do it, he protested, his voice breaking. I can help, Sweetheart, you don't have to prove anything. Clara knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. You're safe here. We all are. But what if we're not? The words burst out of him like they'd been building for weeks. What if he decides we're too much trouble? What if he sends us away? What if, Sam? Clara pulled him into her arms, feeling him tremble. Listen to me. Caleb isn't going to send us away. How do you know? It was a fair question, and Clara didn't have a good answer. How did she know? Because Caleb had been kind? Because he'd kept his word so far? Men changed. Circumstances changed. Nothing was certain. But even as the doubts circled in her mind, she realized something had shifted. She was starting to believe in the possibility of safety. Starting to trust that maybe, just maybe, this quiet rancher meant what he said. Because he gave his word, Clara said finally, and I think he's this kind of man who keeps it. Samuel pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I just want to be good enough. I want to earn our place here. You already have, Clara smoothed his hair. Just by being yourself, by being my brave, wonderful boy. A footstep sounded behind them, and Clara turned to see Caleb standing in the barn doorway, his expression unreadable in the early light. She wondered how much he'd heard. Sam, he said quietly, I need help moving the cattle to the upper pasture today. You up for it? Samuel's face brightened instantly. Yes, sir. Good. But first, breakfast. Your mama's been cooking, and it smells too good to waste. Caleb's eyes met Clara's over Samuel's head. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a shared concern for the boy's fragile confidence. Come on. As they walked back to the house together, Samuel between them chattering about the cattle, Clara felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. This man who owed them nothing had taken the time to notice her son's struggle, to offer him exactly what he needed, meaningful work and gentle reassurance wrapped together. She was starting to understand why Caleb Rourke lived alone. Not because he was cruel or strange, but because he was the kind of man who felt things deeply and showed them sparingly, who found it easier to exist in silence than to risk the vulnerability of connection. In that way, they were more alike than she'd realized. After breakfast, Caleb and Samuel headed out to the pastures. Rose took the younger children to the creek, their laughter carrying across the meadow. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching them play and felt something she hadn't felt in months, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe life could be good again. She was elbow-deep in bread dough when she heard the wagon approaching. Clara's hands stilled. They weren't expecting anyone. Caleb had said this ranch was remote, that he rarely had visitors. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, her heart beginning to pound. A wagon pulled up in the yard. Not Raymond's, thank heaven, but one she didn't recognize. The driver was a woman, older than Clara, with steel-gray hair and a face lined by sun and hard living. She wore men's trousers and a practical shirt, and she handled the reins with the confidence of someone who'd been driving wagons since before Clara was born. "You must be Clara," the woman said, climbing down with surprising agility. "I'm Margaret Hayes. My ranch is about 10 miles east of here, over the ridge." Clara felt herself relax slightly. "Mrs. Hayes, can I help you with something?" "Just Margaret, please, and I'm here to help you if you'll let me." Margaret reached into the back of her wagon and pulled out a basket covered with a cloth. "Heard Caleb Rourke finally got himself some company out here. Thought I'd come by and see if you needed anything. Also brought some preserves and a few things the children might like." Clara's throat tightened. After the cruelty of the Whitmores and the judgment of the Ashford crowd, simple kindness felt overwhelming. "That's very thoughtful. Would you like to come in?" "Love to." Over coffee and slices of the bread Clara had been making, Margaret proved to be exactly what Clara needed: practical, unpretentious, and refreshingly direct. She asked no prying questions about how Clara had come to be at Caleb's ranch, offered no judgment, just talked about the challenges of ranch life and the rhythms of the seasons. "Caleb's a good man," Margaret said eventually, her eyes shrewd. "Known him for near 10 years now, ever since he bought this place. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always been fair and decent in his dealings." "How did he end up here?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the question. "Living alone like this?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. "That's his story to tell, not mine. But I will say this, he's had his share of loss and disappointment, made him careful about letting people close. But that doesn't mean he doesn't feel things, just means he's learned to guard his heart." The words resonated with something Clara had been sensing but couldn't quite articulate. Caleb wasn't cold. He was protected. "The children seem to be settling in well," Margaret continued, glancing out the window where Rose and the little ones were visible in the distance. "That's good to see. They've got color in their cheeks now. When I heard what happened in Ashford," she shook her head. "Disgraceful, what those Whitmores did. Selling family like that?" Clara's hands tightened on her cup. "I didn't know what else to do. I had nowhere to go, no money, no way to provide for them. I thought they might take one or two of the children, give them better lives than I could offer. I didn't realize they'd try to split us all up." "Well, Caleb put a stop to that." Margaret's smile was fierce. "Paid a king's ransom for you all, from what I heard. That's not nothing, Clara. That's a man saying your family matters." "I just wish I understood why." "Maybe there isn't a why that makes sense to anyone but him," Margaret said gently. "Maybe he just saw people who needed help and had the means to give it. Not everything has to be complicated." But it felt complicated. It felt impossibly tangled. Gratitude and fear and the strange growing awareness of Caleb as a man, not just a benefactor, the way his hands moved when he worked, the rare sound of his laugh when Thomas said something unintentionally funny, the careful distance he maintained as if he was afraid of frightening her, or maybe afraid of something else entirely. Margaret stayed through lunch, charming the children with stories of her own ranch and the various misadventures of cattle and horses. When she finally prepared to leave, she clasped Clara's hands warmly. "You need anything at all, you send word. Women out here have to look out for each other. The men do their best, but they don't always understand what we need." "Thank you," Clara said, and meant it with her whole heart. As Margaret's wagon disappeared down the valley road, Clara felt something shift inside her. She wasn't alone. Even out here in this remote place, there were people who saw her as more than a burden or a commodity. People who offered friendship without expecting anything in return. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara found Caleb on the porch, looking out over the darkening valley. The first stars were emerging, and crickets sang in the meadow grass. "Margaret Hayes came by today," Clara said, settling into the other chair. "I saw her wagon from the upper pasture." Caleb didn't look at her, his gaze still on the mountains. "She's good people." "She said you've known her a long time." 10 years, give or take. Clara waited, but he didn't elaborate. After a moment, she said, "She told me you've had your share of loss." Now Caleb did look at her, his expression guarded. "We all have." "Yes." Clara folded her hands in her lap. "But most people don't respond by living alone in the wilderness." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, "I had a wife once, and a daughter." Clara's breath caught. "What happened?" "Fever took them both, winter of '63. Emma was 4 years old." His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "After that, I couldn't stay in the places we'd been together. Couldn't walk into town and see the house we'd planned to buy, the school where Emma would have gone. So I came out here and built something new." "I'm so sorry." Caleb shrugged, the movement stiff. "It was a long time ago." But Clara heard the lie in it. Time didn't heal wounds like that. It just taught you how to carry them. She thought of Michael, of the way grief had hollowed her out in those first weeks after his death. But she'd had the children to anchor her, to give her a reason to keep moving forward. Caleb had been left with nothing but empty rooms and memories. "Is that why you bought us?" she asked softly. "Because you understood what it was like to lose everything?" "Maybe." Caleb's jaw worked. "Or maybe I was just tired of being alone." The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. Clara's heart ached for this man who'd built walls so high he could barely see over them, who'd convinced himself that solitude was safety. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something flicker in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, or fear, or both tangled together. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose I don't." They sat in silence as the stars brightened overhead, and Clara felt the distance between them shift, narrow, become something less like a chasm and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. The weeks flowed into each other like water. The children thrived. Samuel grew confident in his work, learning to anticipate what needed doing and taking pride in doing it well. Rose's laughter returned, bright and frequent. The twins invented elaborate games in the creek and the meadow, their voices carrying on the wind. Even little Thomas and Margaret lost their skittishness, running to show Caleb interesting rocks or wildflowers they'd found. And Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of the ranch in ways that both comforted and unsettled her. She took pride in making the house a home, curtains she sewed from fabric, Caleb brought back from town, wildflowers on the table, the smell of fresh bread and simmering stew filling the rooms. She found herself listening for Caleb's footsteps, watching for him to come in from the fields, feeling a small warm glow when he noticed the things she'd done to improve their surroundings. It was dangerous territory, and she knew it. One afternoon in late June, Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard raised voices from the barn. She dropped the sheet she'd been pinning and hurried toward the sound, her heart racing. Samuel and Caleb stood facing each other in the barn doorway. Samuel's face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists. Caleb looked tired and patient. "I can do it," Samuel was saying. "I'm not a baby." "I didn't say you were," Caleb replied calmly. "I said you're not ready to break that horse yet. There's a difference." "You don't think I'm strong enough. You think I'm useless." "Sam?" Clara stepped forward, shocked by her son's tone. "Apologize right now." "No." Samuel's voice cracked. "He treats me like a child, but I'm the man of the family. I'm supposed to take care of you and the others." "Sam, that's enough." "You're 9 years old," Caleb interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "You're a boy, not a man, and there's no shame in that." "My father would be ashamed of me," Samuel choked out. "He'd be ashamed that I let you take care of us, that I can't—" "Your father would be proud of you," Caleb said firmly. "He'd be proud that you're learning and working hard and taking care of your family the best way you can. But that doesn't mean you have to do everything alone or prove yourself by taking stupid risks." Samuel stared at him, tears streaming down his face. "I just want to be enough." Caleb's expression softened. He knelt down, bringing himself to Samuel's level. "You are enough. You're more than enough. But being enough doesn't mean being grown before your time. Let yourself be a boy, Sam. There's plenty of years ahead for being a man." Something in Samuel broke. He threw himself at Caleb, sobbing into his shoulder, and after a moment's hesitation, Caleb wrapped his arms around the boy and held him while he cried. Clara stood frozen, watching this man who'd been so careful about maintaining distance now offering comfort without reservation. When Samuel's sobs finally subsided, Caleb pulled back and looked him in the eye. "You want to help with that horse?" Samuel nodded, wiping his face. "All right, but we do it my way, slow and careful. You watch and learn, and when I think you're ready, you can work with him yourself. Deal?" "Deal?" Samuel's voice was small but steady. "Good man." Caleb stood, his hand resting briefly on Samuel's shoulder. Then he looked at Clara, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. A question, an apology, a hope. She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara found Caleb in the barn tending to the horses. He looked up as she approached, wariness in his eyes. "I wanted to thank you," Clara said, "for how you handled Samuel today. He's a good boy, just carrying too much weight. He's been trying to be his father since Michael died." Clara leaned against a stall door. "I've tried to tell him he doesn't have to, but he doesn't listen to me. He might start listening now." Caleb ran a brush over the mare's flank. "Sometimes boys need to hear things from a man." "You were good with him, patient. I remember what it was like trying to prove myself at that age." A ghost of a smile crossed Caleb's face. "I broke my arm trying to ride a horse that was way too much for me. My father was furious, but my uncle just laughed and said some lessons come with a price." Clara found herself smiling. "And did you learn your lesson?" "Eventually." Caleb set down the brush and turned to face her. "Clara, I want to say, if I overstepped with Sam, if you think I should have left it to you, you didn't overstep." Clara moved closer, her heart beating fast. "If anything, I'm grateful. The children need what you're giving them. Stability, guidance, a man who shows them kindness instead of cruelty." "They're good kids." Caleb's voice was rough. "All of them. You've raised them well. I've done my best, but it's been hard doing it alone. You're not alone anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara looked up at Caleb, at the strong lines of his face, the careful guarding of his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. She thought of what Margaret had said, that he'd learned to protect his heart. But standing here in the soft lamplight of the barn, she saw the cracks in that protection, the places where loneliness and longing leaked through. "Caleb," she said softly, "what are we doing here?" "What do you mean?" "This." She gestured between them. "Us. My family living in your house, eating your food, depending on your generosity. How long can this go on? What happens when—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish. "When what?" Caleb asked quietly. "When you decide you want your solitude back. When the children become too much trouble. When—" "That's not going to happen. You can't know that." "Yes, I can." Caleb took a step closer, and Clara's breath caught. "Clara, I didn't buy you and your family on a whim. I didn't do it to be charitable or to have help around the ranch. I did it because when I saw you on that platform, saw those children clinging to you, saw the way you were trying to protect them even though you were terrified." He paused, struggling with words. "I saw something I thought I'd lost forever. A chance at having a family again, at making this empty house into a home." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You barely know us." "I know enough." His voice was fierce now, passionate in a way she'd never heard from him. "I know you're strong and brave and you love your children more than anything in the world. I know they're good kids who deserve better than what life's given them so far. And I know that for the first time in 10 years, I wake up in the morning and feel something other than emptiness." "What do you feel?" Clara whispered. Caleb's hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. His palm was rough and warm against her skin. "Hope," he said quietly. "I feel hope." Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She should pull away. She should maintain the careful distance they'd preserved all these weeks. But she was so tired of being alone, of being strong, of carrying everything by herself. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. What if we make a mistake? What if this ruins everything? What if it doesn't?" Caleb's thumb traced her cheekbone. What if we build something good here, Clara? Something real? She opened her eyes and looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the hope and fear warring in his eyes. This man who'd saved her family, who'd given them shelter and safety and asked for nothing in return, he was offering something more now. Not taking, but offering, waiting for her to choose. Clara made her choice. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, the kiss of two people who'd forgotten how to trust but were willing to try. Caleb's arms came around her carefully, as if she were something precious and fragile. Clara's hands rested against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When they pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "We can take this as slow as you need." "I know." Clara smiled, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "That's one of the reasons I'm not as scared as I should be." They stood together in the quiet barn, the horses shifting in their stalls, the night sounds drifting through the open door. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The kiss changed something between them. Though the change was subtle, manifesting in small gestures and shared glances rather than grand declarations. Caleb started finding excuses to touch Clara's hand when passing her something at the table. Clara caught herself smiling at the sound of his voice, at the way he patiently answered Margaret's endless questions or showed Thomas how to whittle. They began sitting together on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, their chairs gradually moving closer together over the course of weeks. The children noticed, though they said nothing directly. But Clara saw the way Samuel relaxed when Caleb put a hand on his shoulder, the way Rose started bringing both of them wildflowers instead of just Clara, the way the twins included Caleb in their elaborate pretend games. They were becoming a family, not by blood, but by choice and effort and the slow building of trust. July arrived with scorching heat and the endless work of haying season. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, cutting and drying the grass that would feed the cattle through the winter. Samuel helped, proud to be trusted with real work. Even Rose and the twins contributed, raking hay into piles while Clara brought water and food to the fields. One afternoon, Clara was carrying a basket of sandwiches out to where Caleb and Samuel were working when she saw the riders coming up the valley. Her blood turned to ice. Raymond and Judith Whitmore, along with two men Clara didn't recognize, one wearing a sheriff's badge. She dropped the basket and ran toward the field, her skirts tangling around her legs. "Caleb!" He looked up immediately, saw the panic in her face, then turned and spotted the riders. His expression hardened. "Sam, go to the house. Get your mother and sisters and brothers inside and stay there. But now!" Something in Caleb's voice brooked no argument. Samuel ran. Clara wanted to run too, to hide with her children, but she forced herself to stand her ground as Caleb strode toward the approaching riders. They met in the yard. Raymond dismounted with a smug expression. Judith remained in the wagon, her face carved from stone. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, and the fourth man, a lawyer by his fine clothes and calculating eyes, surveyed the ranch with cold interest. "Rourke," Raymond said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "we've come on legal business." "State it and leave," Caleb replied flatly. The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Rourke, my name is Charles Pemberton. I represent the Whitmore family. We're here to reclaim property that rightfully belongs to them." "There's no property here that belongs to them." "I beg to differ." Pemberton pulled papers from his jacket. "Mrs. Judith Whitmore is the legal guardian of her grandchildren, appointed by the courts after their father's death. As such, she has every right to reclaim them." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. No, they're my children." "You're an unfit mother," Judith said coldly. "You couldn't provide for them, couldn't care for them properly. I'm taking them where they'll be raised correctly." "You sold us!" Clara's voice broke. "You put us on an auction block like animals." "I was arranging for your welfare," Judith said primly. "Finding you suitable employment. You're the one who chose to become this man's—" She paused delicately. "Housekeeper." The insinuation in her voice made Clara's cheeks burn. Caleb took a step forward, his hand on Clara's arm, both protective and restraining. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "is what they're saying legal?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Mr. Rourke, the thing is, If Mrs. Whitmore has legal guardianship papers, and if she wants the children back, he trailed off. I can't stop her from taking her own grandchildren. They're not just hers, Caleb said. They belong to their mother. A mother who couldn't care for them, Pemberton interjected smoothly. A mother who allowed them to be sold at auction rather than make any real effort to provide. The courts take a dim view of maternal negligence, Mr. Rourke. This is extortion, Caleb said flatly. You're threatening to take those children, so I'll pay you off. How much do you want? Raymond's eyes gleamed. This isn't about money. Everything's about money with you, Raymond. Name your price. $500, Pemberton said, to cover Mrs. Whitmore's expenses in raising the children thus far, and to compensate her for the loss of their future labor. Clara's knees nearly buckled. $500. A fortune. More than most men earned in years. There was no way Caleb could. Done, Caleb said. Raymond's smile faltered. What? I said done. $500, and you signed papers relinquishing all claim to Clara and her children. Forever. Pemberton and Raymond exchanged glances. They'd expected negotiation, argument. The immediate agreement clearly unsettled them. We'll need time to draw up the proper documents, Pemberton said slowly. You do that. But until those papers are signed and Clara's rights as mother are legally secured, those children don't leave this ranch. Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Sheriff, I'm asking you as a witness. These people came here making threats and demands. I'm willing to pay to end this harassment. But if they try to take those children before everything's legal and proper, I'll consider it kidnapping. Are we clear? The sheriff looked between the two parties, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Crystal clear, Mr. Rourke. Good. Caleb turned to Pemberton. Draw up your papers. Make sure they're ironclad. Clara Whitmore gets full legal custody of her children, and the Whitmore family relinquishes all claims, all rights, forever. In exchange, I'll pay your blood money. It's not blood money, Judith said icily. It's what's fair. There's nothing fair about any of this, Caleb replied. But I'll pay it to end it, to make sure you never come near this family again. Raymond's face was purple with suppressed rage. He'd wanted a fight, wanted the satisfaction of taking something from Caleb Rourke. Instead, he was being paid off and dismissed like a common extortionist. We'll be back in 3 days with the papers, Pemberton said stiffly. Make it 2, Caleb countered. I want this finished. They left in a cloud of dust and bitter silence. Clara stood trembling in the yard, watching them disappear down the valley road. When they were out of sight, her legs finally gave out. Caleb caught her, holding her steady. $500, she whispered. Caleb, that's nothing, he said firmly. It's nothing compared to keeping you and the children safe. How will you, I have the money? I've been saving for 10 years with nothing to spend it on. Let me spend it on something that matters. Clara looked up at him, this man who kept giving and giving without asking anything in return. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't have to repay me. Caleb's hands cupped her face gently. Clara, don't you understand yet? You and those children, you're not a debt. You're everything I thought I'd lost. Every moment you're here, you're giving me more than I could ever give you. Clara kissed him then, there in the dusty yard in the harsh afternoon sun, pouring all her gratitude and hope and growing love into that kiss. When they pulled apart, she saw tears on Caleb's cheeks matching her own. 2 days, she said, and then we're really free. 2 days, Caleb agreed, and then you're mine and I'm yours, and nothing will ever separate this family again. They stood together, holding each other against the fear and the hope and the uncertain future, while inside the house 6 children watched through the window and dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. The 2 days that followed felt like holding her breath underwater. Clara went through the motions of daily life, cooking, cleaning, tending the children, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in an endless loop of fear and what-ifs. What if the papers weren't really legal? What if Judith found some other way to take the children? What if Caleb changed his mind about spending such an enormous sum? She watched him work in the fields, his movements steady and unhurried, and wondered how he could be so calm. But then she'd catch him standing at the window, looking down the valley road with an expression that betrayed the tension he tried to hide. He was worried too. He just carried it differently. The children felt the strain. Samuel stuck close to the house, abandoning his usual eagerness to help with ranch work. Rose barely spoke, clutching little Margaret like a lifeline. The twins stopped their games and sat quietly on the porch steps, their identical faces solemn. Even Thomas, too young to fully understand what was happening, seemed to sense the fear hanging over them all. On the evening of the first day, Clara sat on the edge of the bed in the back room, running her fingers through Margaret's hair while the child slept fitfully against her shoulder. The other children lay awake in the darkness, pretending they weren't listening. "Mama?" Rose's voice was small in the shadows. "Are they really going to take us away?" Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to lie, to promise that everything would be fine, but she'd learned that children could smell lies like smoke on the wind. "Mr. Rourke is doing everything he can to make sure that doesn't happen." "But what if it's not enough?" Samuel asked. He sat up in bed, his 9-year-old face far too serious in the dim light. "What if they have the law on their side?" "Then we'll fight," Clara said firmly, though her heart was racing. "We'll fight with every breath in our bodies. I won't let anyone take you from me. Do you understand?" "No one." "But you're just a woman," Henry said, and the casual acceptance of powerlessness in his 6-year-old voice broke something in Clara's chest. "Women don't get to decide things." "This woman does." Clara's voice was fierce. "And I'm telling you right now, you are my children. Mine. Not Judith's, not Raymond's. You belong with me, and I belong with you, and no piece of paper is going to change that." The door to their room creaked open, and Caleb stood in the doorway, backlit by the kitchen lamp. "She's right," he said quietly. "And you should also know that I made a promise to keep this family together. I don't break my promises." Thomas sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Are you going to be our papa now?" The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Clara's breath caught. Caleb went very still. He cleared his throat. "I'd be honored to be, if that's what you all wanted. If that's what your mama wanted." 6 pairs of eyes turned to Clara. She looked at her children, these precious souls she'd carried and birthed and raised, who'd been through so much loss and fear, and saw hope flickering in their faces for the first time in months. Then she looked at Caleb, standing in the doorway like he was afraid to come closer, afraid to presume too much. "I think," Clara said slowly, "that would be a very good thing." The children erupted in whispers and questions. Rose wanted to know if that meant they could stay forever. Samuel asked if he could still call Caleb by his name, or if he should say Papa. The twins simply smiled, their first real smiles in days. Margaret, half asleep, murmured something about a new daddy and burrowed deeper into Clara's arms. Caleb moved into the room, kneeling down so he was at eye level with all of them. "Listen to me, all of you. Whatever happens with those papers, whatever the law says, you're my family now. I chose you, and I'm going to keep choosing you every single day. Nothing is going to change that." "You promise?" Helen whispered. "I promise." Samuel studied Caleb's face with the intensity of a child who'd learned not to trust easily. "And you won't leave us? Even if it's hard?" "Even if it's hard." Caleb's voice was steady as stone. "Your mama and I, we're in this together, and together we're going to make sure you grow up safe and loved and free. That's my word." Clara watched him with the children, saw the gentle certainty in his eyes, the way he spoke to them as people worthy of respect rather than burdens to be tolerated. This man who'd lived alone for a decade, who'd closed his heart against the pain of loss, was opening himself completely to the possibility of being hurt again. For them. For her. She loved him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She loved Caleb Rourke. Not with the desperate, dependent love she'd felt for Michael, but with something deeper and more solid. A love built on respect and shared purpose, and the quiet courage it took to choose hope over fear. After the children finally settled into restless sleep, Clara followed Caleb out to the kitchen. He stood at the window, looking out into the darkness, his shoulders tight with tension. "Caleb," he turned. In the lamplight, his face showed every year of his age, every scar left by loss and loneliness. "I meant what I said in there, about being their father, about being a family. I know you did, but I also know this is fast. We've only known each other a few months, and here I am making promises about forever." He ran a hand through his hair. "If you need more time, If you want to wait until things are settled with the Whitmores, Clara crossed the room and took his hands in hers. I don't want to wait. I've spent too much of my life waiting for things to be perfect, for the right moment, for everything to be certain. And you know what I've learned? There is no perfect moment. There's only the choice you make right now, in this moment, with the information you have. And what choice are you making? I'm choosing you. Claire's voice was steady, sure. I'm choosing this family we're building. I'm choosing to believe that two broken people can make something whole together. Caleb pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a desperate kind of tenderness. I'm terrified, he admitted against her hair. Terrified that they'll find some legal loophole. Terrified that I won't be able to protect you. Terrified that I'll lose you all before I've even really had you. I'm terrified too. Clara held him tighter. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone. They stood together in the quiet kitchen while the night deepened around them, drawing strength from each other's presence. Tomorrow the Whitmores would return with their lawyer and their papers and their demands. Tomorrow they would sign away everything they had to buy the freedom that should have been theirs by right. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. And that was enough. The second day dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds piling up over the mountains. Clara woke before sunrise, her stomach knotted with anxiety. She dressed quietly and slipped out of the room without waking the children, needing a few moments alone before the day's ordeal began. Caleb was already in the kitchen, coffee on the stove, his face drawn with sleeplessness. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her heart clench. You didn't sleep, she said. Neither did you. I tried. Clara accepted the cup of coffee he poured for her, wrapping her hands around its warmth. Kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Me too. Caleb leaned against the counter, his eyes shadowed. I've been over it 100 times in my head. The money's ready. I've got witnesses lined up. Margaret Hayes said she'd come, and the sheriff agreed to be present to make sure everything's legal. Pemberton's a snake, but he's a competent snake. The papers should be ironclad. Should be. Will be, Caleb corrected firmly. Clara, I need you to trust me. This is going to work. What if they demand more money? What if... Then I'll pay it. Caleb set down his cup and took her hands. Listen to me. I don't care what it costs. I'll sell the cattle, sell the land, sell everything I own if I have to. Your children are worth more than all of it combined. There are children now, Clara said softly. You said so yourself. Something fierce and tender crossed Caleb's face. Our children. Yes. He pulled her close, and they stood together in the gray dawn light, gathering courage for what was to come. The children woke, subdued and anxious. Clara made breakfast, but no one ate much. Samuel pushed eggs around his plate. Rose held Margaret on her lap and stared at the table. The twins sat so close together they might have been one person. It's going to be all right, Clara told them, trying to sound confident. By tonight, this will all be over and we'll be free. Really, truly free. And we can stay here forever? Thomas asked. Forever, Caleb confirmed. This is your home now. They were washing up the breakfast dishes when they heard the wagons approaching. Clara's hands stilled in the soapy water, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Caleb touched her shoulder, steady and reassuring, then went to the door. 3 wagons pulled into the yard. The first held Raymond and Judith, both dressed in their Sunday best as if this were some formal occasion rather than extortion dressed up as law. The second carried Pemberton and the sheriff, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The third wagon surprised Clara. It held Margaret Hayes and a man she didn't recognize, older and distinguished-looking in a fine suit. Who's that with Margaret? Clara whispered. Judge Morrison, if I'm not mistaken, Caleb said. Margaret must have brought him as an additional witness. Smart woman. They stepped out onto the porch together, Caleb slightly in front of Clara, protective without being possessive. The children clustered in the doorway behind them, watching with wide, frightened eyes. Pemberton climbed down from his wagon, carrying a leather satchel. Mr. Rourke, Mrs. Whitmore, shall we conduct our business? Let's see the papers first, Caleb said. Pemberton pulled out several documents covered in dense legal language. Caleb took them, his eyes scanning the text with careful attention. Clara saw his jaw tighten once, then relax. Judge Morrison, Caleb called, would you mind reviewing these before we proceed? The judge climbed down from Margaret's wagon with dignified slowness. Happy to help, Caleb. He took the papers and read them, with the meticulous attention of a man who'd spent his life interpreting law. Finally, Morrison looked up. "These papers are not what I expected. I'm not sure what to do with them." Finally, Morrison looked up. "These papers are in order. They grant full legal custody of the 6 minor children to their mother, Clara Whitmore, and permanently terminate any guardianship rights previously held by Judith Whitmore. In exchange, a payment of $500 is to be made to the Whitmore family." He paused, his eyes sharp. "Though I must say it's highly irregular to pay for custody of one's own children." "We're simply being compensated for expenses incurred," Judith said primly. "You're being paid to relinquish rights you never should have claimed," Morrison replied coolly. "But the law is the law, and if both parties agree to these terms, I can witness the signing." "We agree," Caleb said immediately. Pemberton produced a pen and ink. "Then let's proceed. Mrs. Whitmore, if you'll sign here, acknowledging receipt of payment and formally relinquishing all claims—" "Wait." Raymond stepped forward, his face twisted with spite. "I want to see the money first. All of it. I don't trust Rourke to actually pay." Caleb's expression didn't change. He went into the house and returned moments later with a wooden box. He opened it to reveal stacks of bills, more cash than most of the people present had ever seen in one place. Raymond's eyes gleamed with greed. Judith's face remained impassive, but Clara saw her fingers twitch toward the money. "Count it," Caleb said flatly. Pemberton did, his lawyer's fingers quick and precise. $500, exactly. "Then we're done here," Caleb said. "Sign the papers, Judith." For a moment, Clara thought the old woman might refuse, might find some last-minute objection or demand. But Judith had what she'd come for, enough money to live comfortably for years. She took the pen and signed with sharp, angry strokes. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Pemberton turned to Clara. "You need to sign as well, acknowledging acceptance of full custody." Clara's hand shook as she took the pen. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. She looked back at her children in the doorway, saw their pale, hopeful faces. Then she looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragement. She signed her name. Judge Morrison signed as witness. The sheriff signed. Margaret Hayes signed, beaming with satisfaction. And just like that, it was done. Pemberton blotted the ink and folded the papers. "One copy for each party. Mrs. Whitmore, Clara Whitmore. These children are now legally and irrevocably yours. No one can take them from you without your consent." Clara couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. She clutched the papers to her chest while tears streamed down her face. Raymond snatched the box of money. "Come on, Mother, we're done with this place." "One moment," Judge Morrison said sharply. "I want it understood, Raymond Whitmore, Judith Whitmore, that if you ever attempt to contact this family again, if you ever try to intimidate or harass them in any way, I will personally see to it that you face charges for extortion and harassment. Am I clear?" Raymond's face flushed purple. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening. I'm promising." Morrison's voice could have cut glass. "I've known Caleb Rourke for 15 years, and he's one of the finest men in this territory. What you and your mother did to this woman and her children was legal, barely, but it was unconscionable. You've got your blood money. Now take it and get out. And if I ever see you near this ranch again, you'll regret it." Judith's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. Raymond looked like he wanted to argue, but a glance at the judge's face seemed to change his mind. He helped his mother into their wagon, the box of money clutched tight. As they drove away, Raymond turned back one last time. "You think you've won," he called to Caleb. "But everyone in the territory will know what you are, a lonely fool who paid a fortune for a used-up widow and her brats." Caleb stepped forward, his hand on the porch railing. His voice carried across the yard, calm and deadly. "I paid a fortune to free a woman and her children from people who saw them as property. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Now get off my land before I forget the sheriff is watching." The wagons rolled away down the valley road. Clara watched them disappear. These people who'd tormented her, sold her, tried to tear her family apart. When they were finally out of sight, her legs gave out. She sank down on the porch steps, the papers still clutched to her chest, and sobbed. The children rushed to her, wrapping their arms around her, crying too, but crying with relief, with joy, with the overwhelming release of fear held too long. Caleb knelt beside them, his arms encompassing as many as he could reach, and Clara felt his tears on her hair. It's over, she choked out. It's really over. It's over, Caleb confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. You're free, Clara, all of you. Free. Margaret Hayes approached quietly, the judge at her side. Well, she said, her eyes bright with tears, I'd say that calls for a celebration. More than a celebration, Judge Morrison said, smiling. Seems to me this family has some plans to make. He looked at Caleb and Clara with knowing eyes. Am I right? Caleb helped Clara to her feet, his arm around her waist, supporting her. You are, Your Honor. We have plans indeed. Then I'll make myself available whenever you're ready. Morrison tipped his hat. Margaret, we should leave these good people to their happiness. After the judge and Margaret departed, Clara and Caleb stood with the children on the porch, watching the storm clouds move across the valley. The first drops of rain began to fall, cool and clean, washing away the dust of the confrontation. Can we really stay forever? Rose asked, her voice tremulous with hope. Forever and always, Clara promised. This is our home now. Our real home. Samuel looked up at Caleb. And you're really going to be our father? Caleb crouched down to Samuel's level, then to all the children. I'm really going to be your father, if you'll have me. We will, the twins chorused. Thomas threw his arms around Caleb's neck. I always wanted a papa who stayed. The simple statement, so innocent and so devastating, made Caleb close his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I'm staying, Thomas. I promise you that. I'm staying. The rain intensified, drumming on the porch roof, and they all moved inside. Clara built up the fire while Caleb made coffee. The children, released from days of tension, became almost giddy with relief. They chased each other through the house, laughing and shouting. Even Samuel, usually so serious, joined in the chaos. Clara stood at the stove, listening to her children's laughter, real laughter, joy without the shadow of fear, and felt something inside her heal. For so long she'd carried the weight of their survival alone, terrified she wasn't enough, wasn't strong enough, couldn't protect them. But she wasn't alone anymore. Caleb came to stand beside her, his presence solid and warm. What are you thinking? That I never imagined life could feel like this again, Clara said honestly. After Michael died, after everything that happened with the Whitmores, I thought the best I could hope for was survival. But this? She gestured to the children, to the house, to him. This is more than survival. This is living. It is, Caleb agreed, for both of us. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Clara, I know everything's happened fast. I know we've had to focus on the legal matters, on protecting the children. But now that's settled, I want to ask you something properly. Clara's heart began to race. Ask me what? Caleb took both her hands, his eyes searching hers. Marry me, not because it's practical or because the children need a father or because it's what people expect. Marry me because I love you, because I want to build a life with you, because when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it. The children had stopped their game, standing silent in the doorway, watching. Clara saw hope in their faces, felt the weight of their need for security, for permanence. But she also felt her own heart's answer, clear and certain. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb's face transformed, joy breaking through the careful control he usually maintained. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground, and Clara laughed, actually laughed, as he spun her in a circle. The children erupted in cheers, rushing forward to join the embrace, and suddenly they were all tangled together, laughing and crying and holding on tight. When? Rose asked breathlessly. When will you get married? Caleb looked at Clara, his eyebrows raised in question. She thought about it, thought about all the reasons to wait, to be practical, to plan something proper. Then she thought about how much time they'd both already lost to fear and loneliness. As soon as possible, she said firmly. I don't want to wait. Neither do I, Caleb agreed. Judge Morrison is still in the area. We could send word, have him come back at the end of the week. The end of the week, Claire repeated, testing the words. 4 days. In 4 days, she would become Caleb's wife. They would become a real family, bound not just by circumstance, but by choice and commitment and love. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Margaret Hayes returned with several other ranch women, bringing food and supplies and eager assistance. They helped Clara sew a simple dress from beautiful cream-colored fabric Caleb had bought on a hurried trip to Ashford. It wasn't the elaborate gown Clara had worn when she married Michael, but it was far more precious, made with the help of friends, for a marriage entered with open eyes and full heart. The children threw themselves into preparations with enthusiasm. Samuel and Caleb cleaned and organized the barn for the celebration that would follow the ceremony. Rose and the twins picked wildflowers from the meadow, weaving them into garlands. Even little Thomas and Margaret helped, setting the table with care and arranging chairs. On the morning of the wedding, Clara woke with butterflies in her stomach. Margaret arrived early to help her dress, bringing pins and ribbons and gentle encouragement. "You're doing the right thing," Margaret said as she arranged Clara's hair. "Caleb's a good man, and he loves those children like they were his own." "I know," Clara said. "I just keep thinking, what if I'm not enough? What if he regrets this?" "Look at me." Margaret turned Clara to face her. "That man out there has been alone for 10 years because he couldn't find anyone worth risking his heart for. He found that in you. Don't doubt it." Clara nodded, blinking back tears. She looked at herself in the mirror, no longer the terrified, desperate woman who'd stood on an auction block 3 months ago. This woman was stronger, sure, ready to build something new. The ceremony was held in the meadow beside the creek, under the spreading branches of an old apple tree that was just beginning to bloom. It was simple and beautiful, Judge Morrison officiating, the children gathered close, Margaret and a few other neighbors as witnesses. Caleb wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes steady on Clara as she walked toward him. He looked nervous and happy, and entirely present in the moment. When she reached him, he took her hands and held them tight. Judge Morrison spoke about commitment and partnership, about the sacred responsibility of building a family. But Clara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Caleb's face, on the way his hands trembled slightly as they held hers, on the absolute certainty in his eyes. "Do you, Caleb Rourke, take Clara Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do," Caleb said clearly, "with everything I am." "And do you, Clara Whitmore, take Caleb Rourke to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" Clara's voice was steady and sure. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Morrison smiled. "Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb stepped closer, his hands cupping Clara's face gently. "Mrs. Rourke," he said softly, and kissed her. It was a kiss full of promise and hope, of two wounded people choosing to trust each other with their hearts. When they pulled apart, the children were cheering, Margaret was crying happy tears, and the world felt full of possibility. The celebration that followed was joyful and chaotic. Margaret had brought her famous stew, others contributed pies and bread, and there was music from a fiddle one of the neighbors produced. The children danced in the meadow, their laughter ringing out across the valley. Clara and Caleb moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, but always gravitating back to each other. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Clara stood with Caleb at the edge of the meadow, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The children were still playing in the last light, their voices carrying on the warm air. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. Clara leaned into his side, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about how much has changed. 3 months ago, I was standing on an auction block with no hope, no future. And now," she gestured to the scene before them, the house that was now truly home, the children who were safe and loved, the man beside her who'd given them all a second chance. "And now?" Caleb prompted gently. "Now I have everything I never dared to dream of." Clara turned to look up at him. "Thank you. For seeing us when everyone else looked away. For choosing us when you could have chosen solitude. For loving us when we were hard to love." "You were never hard to love," Caleb said fiercely. "You were impossible not to love." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You brought light back into my life, Clara. You and those beautiful children gave me a reason to hope again." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, husband and wife, two broken pieces that had somehow fit together to make something whole, Behind them, the house glowed with lamplight. Before them, their children played in the gathering dusk, safe and free and surrounded by love. This was what family meant, Clara realized. Not blood or obligation, but choice. The daily decision to show up, to care, to protect and nurture, and forgive. It was messy and imperfect and more precious than anything she'd ever known. Samuel called out that it was getting dark, his voice carrying a question. Should they come in? Clara looked at Caleb, who nodded and called back that, yes, it was time. They walked toward the house together, the whole family, and Clara felt peace settle over her like a blessing. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, as a family, as they were always meant to be. The first week of marriage passed in a golden haze of adjustment and discovery. Clara woke each morning in the room that was now truly hers, Caleb's breathing steady beside her, and felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced even in her first marriage. Michael had been her husband, yes, but their relationship had been defined by his family's expectations and the desperate scramble to survive. This was different. This was partnership built on mutual respect and hard-won trust. The children adapted with surprising speed. Samuel began calling Caleb Papa without prompting, the word slipping out naturally when he asked for help with the horses. Rose started setting the table for 8 instead of 7, automatically including Caleb in her count. The twins attached themselves to him with the enthusiasm they brought to everything, demanding stories and horseback rides and his attention at every opportunity. Even Margaret, shy little Margaret, would reach for Caleb's hand when crossing the yard, trusting him to keep her safe. Only Thomas seemed uncertain, watching the others with wide, thoughtful eyes but maintaining a careful distance. Clara noticed but didn't push. The boy was only 4 and had lost his father barely 6 months ago. He needed time to understand that this new father wouldn't disappear like the last one. One afternoon, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard raised voices from the barn. Not angry, exactly, but intense. She hurried over and found Thomas standing in the doorway, his small face crumpled with confusion and hurt, while Caleb knelt a few feet away looking helpless. "Thomas, what's wrong?" Clara asked, moving to her son's side. "He's not my real papa," Thomas said, his voice wobbling. "My real papa went away, and he's never coming back, and I don't want another one who's going to leave too." Caleb's face showed naked pain. Clara's heart broke for both of them, for her son struggling to understand loss and for her husband trying so hard to love a child who was afraid to love him back. "Tommy," Clara said gently, kneeling down, "can I tell you something?" The boy nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Your first papa loved you very, very much. He didn't want to leave you. Sometimes terrible things happen that nobody can control, and people we love go away even though they don't want to." Clara smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "But Caleb, Papa Caleb, he chose to be here. He chose you, and every single day he keeps choosing you. That's a different kind of love, but it's just as real." "What if he stops choosing?" Thomas whispered. Caleb moved closer, slowly, like he was approaching a frightened animal. "Thomas, look at me." The boy did, his eyes swimming with tears. "I know I'm not the papa who gave you life," Caleb said quietly. "I can't replace him, and I'm not going to try. But I can promise you this. I will never, ever leave you by choice. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when you're grown. You're my son now, in every way that matters, and nothing is going to change that." "But you didn't know me before," Thomas said. "You just found us. Maybe when you know me better, you won't want me anymore." "Tommy," Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "I've known you for 3 months, and in that time I've watched you be brave when you were scared, kind when others were mean, and gentle with your little sister even when you were tired. I've seen you try so hard to be good, to be helpful, to make people happy. And you know what I think?" Thomas shook his head. "I think I'm the luckiest man alive to get to be your papa, because you, Thomas Michael Whitmore, are exactly the kind of son I'd hoped to have." Something in Thomas's face cracked open. He launched himself at Caleb, wrapping his arms around the man's neck and sobbing into his shoulder. Space. Her own cheeks wet. She watched 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 her own cheeks wet. She space her own cheeks wet. She watched her husband rock her son, murmuring reassurances, and felt love swell in her chest so powerfully it almost hurt. This man who'd been so careful, so guarded, was now completely vulnerable, offering his whole heart to a frightened child who might reject it. "Papa." The word hung in the air between them. "I'm not your papa," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. "I'm your Caleb." Thomas wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Okay." "Papa?" The word hung in the air between them, sacred and binding. Then Thomas smiled, his first real, unguarded smile since his father died, and Caleb laughed, a sound of pure joy, and swung the boy up onto his shoulders. "Come on," Caleb said. "Let's go see if your mama needs help with anything." As they walked toward the house, Thomas perched proudly on Caleb's shoulders. Clara fell into step beside them. Caleb's free hand found hers and squeezed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For trusting me with them. With him." Caleb's eyes were still bright with tears. "I know it's not easy, letting someone else into their lives." "You've earned that trust 1,000 times over," Clara said. "And anyway, you're not someone else anymore. You're their father." The word settled something in Caleb's expression, some last uncertainty finally put to rest. He was their father, not by blood or law alone, but by choice and love, and the daily work of showing up. That was more real than any biological connection could ever be. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Thomas insisted on sitting next to Caleb instead of Clara. The other children took note, exchanging knowing glances. They understood what had shifted, what barrier had finally broken down. Their family was complete now, all the pieces finally in place. The easy rhythm of summer days continued. Caleb taught Samuel how to throw a rope and ride the more spirited horses. He built Rose a small garden plot of her own where she grew vegetables with fierce dedication. The twins learned to fish in the creek, and Caleb showed endless patience as they tangled lines and lost hooks and occasionally fell in. Thomas shadowed him everywhere, asking endless questions that Caleb answered with careful seriousness. And Margaret, sweet Margaret, would climb into his lap in the evenings and fall asleep while he read aloud from a book of fairy tales. Clara watched it all with a mixture of joy and wonder. Her children were healing, their wounds slowly closing over with the scar tissue of security and love. They laughed more, worried less. Their nightmares came less frequently. Samuel's desperate need to prove his worth began to ease. Rose's anxiety about food, hoarding pieces of bread in her pockets, eating too fast as if someone might take it away, gradually disappeared. But just as Clara began to believe that their troubles were truly behind them, reality intruded with sharp, unwelcome teeth. It started with whispers in town. Clara noticed it when she went to Ashford with Caleb to buy supplies. People staring, conversations stopping when she passed. Women pulling their children away as if Clara carried some contagion. At first she thought she was imagining it, being overly sensitive. But then Mrs. Brennan pulled her aside in the general store, her kind face troubled. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. "There's been talk about you and Mr. Rourke, about the circumstances of your marriage." Clara's stomach tightened. "What kind of talk?" Mrs. Brennan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Raymond Whitmore's been spreading stories, saying that Caleb bought you like property, that you're living in sin, that the marriage isn't proper because—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing. "Because what?" Clara pressed. "Because you were purchased," Mrs. Brennan said bluntly. "Raymond's telling anyone who'll listen that a marriage entered into under such circumstances can't be moral or legal, that you're Caleb's, his—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The implication was clear and ugly. Clara felt heat flood her face, not shame, but rage. "That's a lie. Judge Morrison married us properly, with witnesses. We have a legal certificate." "I know that, dear, and most sensible people know it too. But Raymond's poisoning the well, and there are always those who enjoy a juicy scandal." Mrs. Brennan squeezed Clara's hand. "I'm telling you because I want you to be prepared. Some people are going to treat you differently now. They're going to judge." "Let them judge," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I know the truth. My husband knows the truth. That's what matters." But as they rode home that afternoon, the wagon loaded with supplies, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She told Caleb what Mrs. Brennan had said, watching his jaw tighten with anger. "Raymond can't let it go," Caleb said flatly. "Can't stand that we're happy, and he's miserable." "What if people believe him? What if they treat the children differently because of these stories?" "Then we'll deal with it." Caleb's voice was firm. "Clara, we've done nothing wrong. We were married properly, legally. What Raymond says doesn't change that." But words had power, Clara knew. Words could wound just as deeply as any physical blow. And she was terrified of what those words might do to her children, who were only just beginning to feel safe in the world again. Her fears were realized sooner than expected. The following week, Rose came home from the creek where she'd gone to play with some neighbor children, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "What happened?" Claire asked, pulling her daughter close. "They said we're not a real family," Rose sobbed. "They said Papa bought you and that makes us different from them. They said their parents told them not to play with us anymore because we're from bad people." Clara felt fury and heartbreak war in her chest. She looked up to see Caleb standing in the doorway, his face like thunder. "Who said this?" he asked quietly. "The Peterson children. And the Miller girls." Rose wiped her eyes. "Are we bad people, Mama? Did Papa do something wrong when he married you?" "No, sweetheart, absolutely not." Clara held her daughter tight. "Some people don't understand what happened, and they're saying mean things because they're ignorant and small-minded. But our family is real and good and true, and don't you ever believe otherwise." Caleb came to kneel beside them. "Rose, listen to me. Your mom and I got married because we love each other and because we wanted to make a family together. That's all that matters. People who judge you for how our family began don't know what they're talking about, and they're not worth your tears." "But they won't play with me anymore," Rose said, her voice small and broken. "Then they're missing out," Caleb said firmly, "because you're smart and kind and wonderful, and any child would be lucky to have you as a friend." But the damage was done. Over the next few days, the other children experienced similar rejections. Samuel got into a fight with a boy who called Clara a bad name. The twins came home confused and hurt after being excluded from a game. Even little Thomas asked why other children's parents looked at them funny. Clara felt the old fear creeping back. The fear that they would never truly belong anywhere, that the circumstances of their lives would always mark them as different, less than, unworthy. She lay awake at night, Caleb's arm around her, and wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe they should leave this place, go somewhere no one knew their story. But where would they go? And why should they have to run from lies and prejudice? The crisis came to a head when Margaret Hayes arrived at the ranch one morning, her face grim with purpose. "There's going to be a town meeting," she announced without preamble. "The Petersons and some others are calling for it. They want to discuss whether children from questionable households should be allowed to attend the school when it opens in the fall." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "They want to ban my children from school? They want to ban any child whose parents' marriage doesn't meet their narrow definition of propriety." Margaret's voice was sharp with contempt. "It's Raymond's doing, of course. He's been working behind the scenes, stirring up trouble, calling in favors. He wants to punish you and Caleb by making your children social outcasts." "When is this meeting?" Caleb asked. "Tomorrow night, in the town hall." Margaret looked between them. "You should be there. You should defend yourselves." "We shouldn't have to defend ourselves," Clara said, her voice shaking with anger. "We've done nothing wrong." "I know that, you know that, but sometimes you have to stand up and make people see the truth, even when it's not fair that you have to do it." That night, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch after the children were in bed, the weight of the coming confrontation pressing down on them both. "Maybe we should just keep them home," Clara said. "Teach them ourselves. They don't need school." "They do need school," Caleb said firmly. "They need to learn to read and write properly, to do figures, to have opportunities we can't give them here. And more than that, they need to know that they don't have to hide or be ashamed, that they have every right to the same chances as any other child." "But what if we go to this meeting and make things worse? What if we give these people a chance to humiliate us in front of the whole town?" Caleb took her hand. "Then we'll be humiliated. But we'll do it standing up, telling the truth, fighting for our children. That's worth any amount of embarrassment." Clara looked at him, this man who'd been so private, so protective of his solitude, now willing to expose himself to public judgment for the sake of their family. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've said that enough, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too." Caleb kissed her forehead. "And tomorrow we're going to show this town exactly what kind of family we are." The next evening, they left the children with Margaret Hayes and drove into Ashford. The town hall was packed, every bench filled, people standing along the walls. Clara felt dozens of eyes turned toward them as they entered, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, her hand tight in Caleb's. They found seats near the back just as the meeting was called to order. Harold Peterson, a prosperous merchant and father of 6, stood at the front of the room with an air of self-righteous authority. "We're here tonight to discuss a matter of community standards and the welfare of our children," he began. "Ashford is growing. We're going to have a proper school this fall, and we need to establish what kind of influences we want in that school." "Get to the point, Harold," someone called from the back. Peterson's face reddened. "Fine. There are families in this community whose circumstances call their moral character into question. Families formed through irregular means. I don't believe children from such families should be allowed to mix freely with our children, bringing their questionable values into the schoolroom." A murmur ran through the crowd, some agreeing, others uncertain. Caleb stood up. "Are you talking about my family, Peterson?" The room went dead silent. Peterson lifted his chin. "If the shoe fits, Rourke, you bought yourself a wife and a ready-made family. That's not how decent people conduct themselves." "I paid money to free a woman and her children from people who were abusing them," Caleb said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Then I married that woman legally and adopted her children as my own. There's nothing irregular about that except the cruelty that made it necessary." "You bought a woman," Peterson insisted, "like livestock, like property. That's not a proper marriage. It's ownership." Clara stood up, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "No one owns me, Mr. Peterson. I chose to marry Caleb Rourke of my own free will, with full understanding of what I was doing. Judge Morrison himself performed the ceremony. Are you suggesting our judge doesn't know how to conduct a proper marriage?" "I'm suggesting that the circumstances make it questionable," Peterson said stubbornly. Your children, my children are innocent, Clara interrupted, her voice rising. They've done nothing to deserve your judgment or exclusion. They've suffered loss and hardship most of your pampered children couldn't imagine. And now they finally have stability, love, and a real home. How dare you try to take that away from them? We're not taking anything away, a woman spoke up. Mrs. Miller, whose daughters had shunned Rose. We're simply protecting our children from bad influences. What bad influence? Caleb demanded. The influence of children who've learned resilience, who know the value of hard work, who understand gratitude and loyalty because they've known what it's like to have nothing. The influence of a woman who was sold like cattle, Peterson said bluntly, who accepted that degradation instead of finding honest work. The words hung in the air, ugly and cruel. Clara felt tears of rage and humiliation burning behind her eyes. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Judge Morrison stood up from where he'd been sitting unnoticed in the corner. He moved to the front of the room with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I've heard just about enough ignorance for one evening, Morrison said, his voice cold as winter. Let me clarify a few facts. First, the marriage between Caleb Rourke and Clara Whitmore is entirely legal and proper. I performed it myself, and I can assure you there was nothing irregular about it. Second, the circumstances that led to their union were not of their making, but of the Whitmore family's cruelty. Raymond and Judith Whitmore are the ones who should face your judgment, not the people they victimized. But Rourke paid money for her, Peterson protested weakly. He paid money to secure her children's freedom from people who saw them as commodities, Morrison corrected sharply. That's not purchase, that's rescue. And if you can't see the difference, then you're more foolish than I thought. He looked around the room, his gaze piercing. I've known Caleb Rourke for 15 years. He's honest, hardworking, and decent, which is more than I can say for some people in this room who are so eager to cast stones. Mrs. Brennan stood up. I agree with the judge. The Rourke children are polite, well-behaved, and kind. My own grandson plays with Samuel, and I've never seen a better influence on him. This whole meeting is nothing but gossip and prejudice dressed up as concern. Hear, hear, several voices called out. Margaret Hayes rose to her feet. I've known this family since they came together. I've watched how Caleb treats those children, with patience and love and respect. I've watched how Clara has transformed a lonely house into a warm home. They're a real family in every way that matters, and anyone who says otherwise is blind. More voices joined in support. Not everyone, there were still plenty who looked uncomfortable or disapproving, but enough that Peterson's confident authority began to waver. Caleb spoke again, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. I understand that some of you are uncomfortable with how our family began, but I'm asking you to look at who we are now, not at the circumstances that brought us together. My children, and they are mine in every way that counts, are good kids who deserve the same chances as your children. They deserve education and friendship and the opportunity to grow up in a community that sees them for who they are, not where they came from. Clara added, her voice thick with emotion. We're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking not to be punished for surviving, for finding love and family in the midst of hardship. Is that really so terrible? The room was quiet for a long moment. Then a man Clara didn't know stood up. I came here tonight thinking Peterson might have a point, he said slowly. But listening to all this, I realize I've been a fool. My own family came to this territory with nothing, running from hardship back east. If people had judged us by our circumstances instead of our character, we'd never have made it. I vote we drop this nonsense and let the Rourke children attend school like any others. Seconded, called another voice, and another. Peterson looked around, seeing his support crumbling. But the matter is settled, Judge Morrison said with finality. Unless there are other legitimate concerns to discuss, I suggest we adjourn this meeting and stop wasting everyone's time. The meeting broke up in a buzz of conversation. Some people came over to shake Caleb's hand or offer Clara words of support. Others left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Peterson and the Millers departed with tight faces and angry mutters. But it was over. The immediate threat was gone. Clara leaned against Caleb, suddenly exhausted, as people filed out around them. You were magnificent, Caleb said softly. Both of you were. Morrison approached, his stern face softening into something almost like a smile. Well done. Couldn't have defended yourselves better if I'd coached you myself. Thank you for speaking up, Clara said. We might not have won without you. You would have, Morrison said. Eventually. People just needed a reminder of what really matters. He tipped his hat. Now go home to those children and tell them they're going to school in the fall with every other child in this district. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. As they drove home under a sky full of stars, Clara felt something shift in her chest. They'd faced down prejudice and won. Not completely, not universally, but enough. Enough to secure their children's future. Enough to prove that their family was as real and valid as any other. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. I'm thinking that we just fought our first real battle as a family, Clara said, and we won. We did. Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness. Together. Together, Clara agreed. And in that word was everything, promise and partnership and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built, no matter what challenges came their way. When they arrived home, Margaret met them at the door with a knowing smile. Well? They're going to school, Caleb said simply. Margaret whooped and pulled them both into a hug. I knew you'd manage it. Those children are going to be so happy. The children themselves were already asleep, scattered across the beds in peaceful exhaustion. Clara and Caleb looked in on them, these 6 precious souls who'd become theirs through such an unusual path. They're going to be all right, Clara whispered. Aren't they? Better than all right, Caleb said. They're going to thrive. Because they have something most children never get. They have parents who chose them deliberately, who fought for them, who will keep fighting for them no matter what. That's a powerful thing. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the dim lamplight. I never imagined I could be this happy. Not after everything that happened. But you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope, Clara said simply. Hope for the future. Hope that good things can still happen. Hope that broken things can be mended. She kissed him softly. Thank you for that. Thank you for all of it. They stood together in the quiet house, holding each other close, while outside the valley settled into peaceful darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight, they had this. The knowledge that they'd stood together against adversity and won. That their family, however unusually it had been formed, was strong and real and worth fighting for. And that was more than enough. Summer deepened into the rich fullness of August, and the valley transformed into a tapestry of gold and green. The victory at the town meeting had shifted something fundamental in the family's relationship with the wider world. Word spread that Judge Morrison himself had defended the Rourkes, and that carried weight even among those who'd been eager to judge. The outright hostility faded, replaced by cautious acceptance, and in some cases, genuine respect. The children felt the change most acutely. Rose returned from town one afternoon with a shy smile, reporting that the Peterson girls had apologized and asked if she wanted to come to their house for pie. Samuel was invited to help with a barn raising at a neighboring ranch, his skill with rope and horses earning him praise from men who'd previously looked at him with suspicion. Even the twins found playmates again, their laughter ringing out across the creek as they splashed with other children from nearby homesteads. But the real transformation was happening closer to home, in the quiet spaces between daily tasks and shared meals. The children had stopped asking whether they could stay, stopped testing the boundaries of Caleb's patience to see if he would send them away. They'd begun to truly believe in the permanence of this home, this family, and with that belief came a loosening of fear that allowed something deeper to grow. Clara saw it in small moments. Samuel asking Caleb's opinion on which horse would make the best mount for him when he got older, assuming Caleb would be there to see him grown. Rose planning her garden for next spring with the confidence that she'd be here to plant it. The twins making elaborate plans for a treehouse they wanted to build when we're bigger. Thomas telling Margaret stories about when Papa teaches me to rope cattle like Samuel, his future stretching out before him bright and certain. It was a Friday evening in late August when everything came together in a way none of them had anticipated. Caleb came in from the fields earlier than usual, his face thoughtful. The children were scattered around the house, Samuel mending a bridle at the kitchen table, Rose reading to Margaret on the porch, the twins and Thomas playing some elaborate game involving sticks and rocks in the yard. Clara, Caleb said, "Can we talk for a minute?" Something in his tone made her set down the bread dough she'd been kneading. Of course. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down, his work-roughened hands flat on the table. I've been thinking about something, and I want your thoughts before I do anything. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and sat across from him. I'm listening. The children need to understand their place here. Really understand it, beyond just living here and calling me Papa. Caleb's eyes were serious. I want to formally adopt them. Legal papers, court proceedings, the whole thing. Make them Rourke's officially, not just in practice. Clara's breath caught. She'd known the adoption was always a possibility, but hearing Caleb say it out loud, with such certainty and conviction, made it real in a way that shook her. That's a big step, she said carefully. It would mean they're legally mine, not just morally, Caleb interrupted. It would mean if anything happened to me, they'd have inheritance rights to the ranch. It would mean their names would change, their future would be secured. It would mean no one, not Raymond, not Judith, not anyone, could ever question their belonging here. They'd have to agree, Clara said, especially Samuel and Rose. They're old enough to remember their father. This would be asking them to choose. I know. Caleb's jaw tightened. And if they don't want it, I'll understand. But I want to give them the option. I want them to know that this isn't temporary or conditional, that I'm committed to them for life, legally and every other way. Clara reached across the table and took his hands. You're a good man, Caleb Rourke, a better father than most children ever get. If you want to ask them, then ask them. But be prepared for it to bring up complicated feelings. They loved Michael, whatever his flaws. I'm not trying to replace him, Caleb said quietly. I just want to give them security. I know, and they'll know that too. Clara squeezed his hands. When do you want to talk to them? Tonight, after supper, all of us together. So after the dishes were cleared and the children gathered in the main room, Samuel sprawled on the floor, Rose in the rocking chair with Margaret on her lap, the twins sharing the bench, Thomas pressed against Caleb's side. Caleb cleared his throat and began. I want to talk to you all about something important, he said, something that affects our whole family. 6 pairs of eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Clara sat nearby, her hands folded in her lap, offering silent support. You know I love you all, Caleb continued. You know I think of you as my children, that this is your home for as long as you want it to be. But right now, legally, you're still Whitmore's. Your last names, your legal papers, they all say Whitmore. Samuel sat up straighter. So? So I want to change that. If you'll let me. Caleb looked at each child in turn. I want to formally adopt you. Go to court, sign papers, make it official. Make you Rourke's, not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law. Silence descended over the room. Clara saw emotions flicker across the children's faces. Surprise, confusion, hope, fear. Rose spoke first, her voice small. What about our first Papa? If we become Rourke's, does that mean we're saying he didn't matter? No, Caleb said firmly. Your father will always be your father. He gave you life, he loved you, and nothing can change that. But he's gone, and I'm here, and I want to make sure you're protected, that you have legal rights to this land and this family. That's what adoption means. It's about securing your future, not erasing your past. Would we have to call ourselves something different? Henry asked. Your last name would be Rourke instead of Whitmore, Caleb explained. But your first names would stay the same. You'd still be you, just with a different family name. I don't want to be a Whitmore, Samuel said suddenly, his voice hard. The Whitmores sold us. They treated Mama like garbage. They tried to split us up. I don't want their name. Sam, Clara started, but he pushed on. I mean it, Mama. I don't want anything from them. Papa Caleb has been more of a father to me in 4 months than they ever were in my whole life. If he wants to adopt us, I want him to. Rose bit her lip, tears shining in her eyes. I remember my first Papa. I remember him holding me when I was little, telling me stories. If I take a new last name, will I forget him? Caleb stood and crossed to kneel in front of her. You'll never forget him, Rose. Memories don't live in last names. They live in hearts. You can be Rose Rourke and still remember every story your first Papa told you. Can you understand that? Rose nodded slowly. I think so. She looked at Clara. What do you think, Mama? Do you want us to be Rourkes? Clara felt her throat tighten. I want whatever makes you feel safest and most loved. If being Rourkes does that, then yes. If you need more time to think about it, that's fine too. I want to be a Rourke, Helen announced. Henry does too. She elbowed her twin, who nodded vigorously. I want to, Thomas said, looking up at Caleb with absolute trust. Can I? Of course you can. Caleb ruffled his hair. Margaret, who'd been quiet throughout, spoke up in her tiny voice. What's adoption? Adoption, Clara corrected gently, means Papa Caleb would officially become your father, and you'd officially become his daughter. Forever and ever. Like a family? Exactly like a family. We already are a family, but this would make it extra official. Margaret considered this seriously. Okay, I want adoption. Everyone laughed, the tension breaking. But Clara saw Rose still struggling, her young face caught between loyalty to a dead father and love for the man who'd taken his place in their lives. Rosie, Caleb said gently, you don't have to decide right now. Take all the time you need. This isn't something I'm forcing on anyone. Rose's voice cracked. I feel like I'm betraying him, my first papa. He loved me so much, and now I'm going to take someone else's name and pretend he never existed. You're not pretending anything, Samuel said fiercely. Papa Michael is dead. He's been dead for months. And yeah, maybe he loved us, but he also left us with nothing. He didn't protect us from his family. Papa Caleb did that. Papa Caleb is the one who's here. That's not fair, Rose shouted, shocking everyone. She rarely raised her voice. It's not his fault he died. He didn't want to leave us. I know that, Samuel shot back. But he's gone, Rose. And we have a chance at a real family now, a safe family. And I'm not going to throw that away because you want to hold on to someone who can't come back. Sam, that's enough, Clara said sharply. But Rose was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her small frame. I don't want to forget him. I don't want to forget what he looked like, how he sounded. It's already getting fuzzy in my head, and I'm scared that if I change my name, I'll lose him completely. Caleb gathered her into his arms, Margaret and all. Listen to me, sweet girl. Changing your name won't make you forget. You want to know how I know? Rose nodded against his chest. Because I had a daughter once. Her name was Emma. She died when she was 4 years old, and I thought I'd never stop hurting from losing her. Caleb's voice was thick with old grief. For a long time, I couldn't even say her name out loud. I thought if I did, I'd fall apart. But you know what I learned? What? Rose whispered. I learned that love doesn't die when people do. Emma will always be my daughter, always be part of my heart. And when I adopted you and your brothers and sisters in my heart, I didn't lose her. I just made room for more love. He pulled back to look Rose in the eyes. You can love your first papa and also love me. You can honor his memory and still build a future with a new name. Those things don't cancel each other out. How do you remember her? Rose asked. Your Emma? I tell stories about her. I visit her grave sometimes and talk to her. I let myself feel sad when the memories come. Caleb smiled softly. And I try to live in a way that would make her proud. Same way you can honor your first papa, by being the best Rose you can be, by being brave and kind and true. That's a better memorial than any name. Rose was quiet for a long moment, her tears slowing. Then she said, Can I think about it for a little while? Not too long, just a little while. Take all the time you need, Caleb assured her. But the rest of us can do it, right? Samuel pressed. We can start the adoption even if Rose isn't ready. Caleb looked to Clara, who nodded. If that's what you want, yes. But I'd prefer to do it all together, as a complete family. Then I'll decide soon, Rose promised. I just need to think. The conversation moved on to other things. When the adoption would happen, what the process involved, whether they'd have a celebration afterward. The younger children were excited, already imagining themselves as Rourkes. Samuel was resolute, his jaw set with determination. Only Rose remained uncertain, her internal struggle visible in her troubled eyes. That night, after the children were in bed, Clara found Rose sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. Deciding right away, Rose said miserably. I feel like everyone's mad at me for not deciding right away, Rose said miserably. No one's mad, sweetheart. This is a big decision, and you're allowed to take your time with it. Sam thinks I'm being stupid. Sam is 9 years old and thinks everything is simple because he's angry at the Whitmores, Clara said gently. But you're different. You remember your father more clearly, and you're old enough to understand what it means to let go of his name. That's not stupid. That's thoughtful. I do love Papa Caleb, Rose said urgently, as if Clara had accused her of not. I really do. He's been so good to us. He's patient and kind, and he doesn't yell. He reads to me and listens when I talk, and he built me that garden bed. I love him so much. I know you do. But I loved my first papa too, and I'm scared that if I forget his name, I'll forget him, and then it'll be like he never existed, like he never mattered. Rose's voice broke. I don't want him to not matter. Clara pulled her daughter close. Your father will always matter. He gave me you and your brothers and sisters, and that's the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. But honey, you have to understand something. What? Your first papa, Michael, he loved you, but he made choices that put his family ahead of us. He worked in dangerous places, took risks, and when he died, he left us with people who hurt us. Clara kept her voice gentle, factual. He wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't perfect either. And it's okay to acknowledge that. Are you saying I shouldn't love him? No. I'm saying you can love him for who he was, flaws and all, and still choose to build a future with someone who's proven he'll protect you. Clara stroked Rose's hair. Caleb chose us when no one else would. He paid a fortune to keep us together. He married me knowing he was taking on 6 children. He fights for you every single day. That's not something to take lightly. I know, Rose whispered. So ask yourself this. What would make you feel safest? What would make you happiest? If you want to keep the name Whitmore, we'll support you. But if you want to be a Rourke, to officially belong to this family and this home, that's okay too. Your first papa would want you to be happy and safe. I really believe that. Rose leaned into Clara's embrace, her small body trembling. I'm just scared of making the wrong choice. There is no wrong choice, baby. There's just the choice that's right for you. They sat together in the darkness, mother and daughter, while the stars wheeled overhead and the night sounds of the valley surrounded them. Finally, Rose spoke. I think I want to be a Rourke. I'm still scared, but I think I want it. You're sure? Not completely, but I don't think I'll ever be completely sure about something this big. Rose looked up at Clara. Is that okay? To do something even when you're scared? That's the definition of courage, sweetheart. Doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Clara kissed her forehead. And I'm so proud of you for being brave enough to choose your future instead of staying stuck in the past. The next morning, Rose announced her decision to the family over breakfast. Samuel whooped and hugged her. The twins cheered. Thomas and Margaret, not fully understanding the significance but catching the excitement, clapped their hands. And Caleb looked at Rose with such pride and tenderness that Clara felt her heart swell. Thank you, he said simply, for trusting me. Thank you for being worth trusting, Rose replied. And Clara saw her daughter's shoulders straighten with the weight of her decision, with the courage it had taken to make it. The adoption proceedings were scheduled for the following week. Judge Morrison agreed to handle the case personally, which meant traveling to Ashford for a formal hearing. Clara spent the intervening days alternating between excitement and terror. What if something went wrong? What if there was some legal technicality that prevented the adoption? What if Raymond somehow found a way to interfere? But Caleb remained steady, unshakable in his certainty that everything would work out. He spent hours with the children, explaining what would happen in court, preparing them for questions the judge might ask, making sure they understood that this was serious and binding and forever. The day of the hearing dawned bright and clear. They all dressed in their best clothes. The children in the outfits Clara had sewn and mended until they looked almost new, Caleb in a suit he'd owned for years but rarely wore, Clara in her wedding dress altered and updated. They looked like what they were, a family. The courtroom was less formal than Clara had feared, just a small room in the back of the town hall, with Judge Morrison behind a desk and a few chairs for witnesses. Margaret Hayes was there, beaming with pride. Mrs. Brennan had come too, along with several other townspeople who'd become friends over the summer. Even the sheriff attended, offering his support. Judge Morrison called them forward. The children lined up in front of his desk, Samuel standing tall, Rose clutching Clara's hand, the twins unusually solemn, Thomas and Margaret wide-eyed with the importance of the occasion. "Well now," Morrison said, his stern face softening, "this is quite a crew. Let's make sure we're all clear on what's happening here today. Mr. Rourke has petitioned to formally adopt all 6 of you children, making you legally his sons and daughters. Do you all understand what that means?" "It means we'll be Rourkes," Samuel said clearly, "forever." "That's right. It also means Mr. Rourke will have full legal rights and responsibilities as your father. He'll be obligated to care for you, provide for you, and make decisions about your welfare until you're grown." Morrison looked at each child. "This is permanent. Once I sign these papers, you can't change your minds. Are you all certain this is what you want?" One by one, the children nodded or said yes. Even Margaret, who probably didn't fully comprehend what was happening, said, "Yes, please," in her sweet little voice. Morrison turned his attention to Caleb. "And you, Mr. Rourke, do you understand that you're taking on complete legal responsibility for 6 children? That you're committing to raise them, educate them, and provide for them regardless of circumstances?" "I do, Your Honor," Caleb said firmly, "and I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "Very well." Morrison picked up his pen. "Let the record show that all parties have given clear and informed consent. Based on my observation of this family over the past months, and the testimony of witnesses present, I find that this adoption is in the best interests of the children involved." He signed the documents with careful strokes. "By the power vested in me, I hereby grant this petition. Samuel, Rose, Henry, Helen, Thomas, and Margaret, you are now legally and permanently the children of Caleb and Clara Rourke." For a moment, no one moved. Then Margaret squealed and threw herself at Caleb, who caught her and swung her up into his arms. The other children erupted in excitement, talking over each other, laughing, a few of them crying. The witnesses applauded. Mrs. Brennan dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Clara stood back, watching her family celebrate, and felt something profound settle in her chest. This was real now, not just in their hearts, but in law and record and fact. Her children had a father who'd chosen them deliberately. They had a home that no one could take away. They had a future that stretched out before them, bright and full of possibility. Caleb caught her eye over the children's heads and mouthed, "We did it." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face, too overcome to speak. Judge Morrison cleared his throat, bringing order back to the chaos. "I have something else for you all." He pulled out a wooden box and opened it to reveal 6 identical silver lockets on chains. "These are from my late wife's collection. She'd have wanted them to go to children who understood the value of family. For the girls, Rose, Helen, and Margaret." He handed out 3 lockets. "And for the boys, Samuel, Henry, and Thomas." He distributed 3 pocket watches. "Something to remember this day by." The children were stunned into awed silence by the gifts. Rose opened her locket to find it already contained a tiny photograph of all of them together, taken by a traveling photographer who'd passed through weeks ago. "How did you, Clara began. "Margaret Hayes is a meddler and a schemer," Morrison said with a slight smile. "She arranged it all, said every family should have something to mark important moments." Margaret Hayes just grinned, unrepentant. After the formalities were complete, they spilled out into the street where Caleb had arranged a surprise. A wagon waited, decorated with ribbons and flowers, pulled by the ranch's 2 best horses. In the back were baskets of food and blankets. "What's all this?" Clara asked. "We're having a celebration," Caleb announced. "Not at home, not in town. Somewhere new. Somewhere that belongs just to us." He drove them up into the foothills, following a track Clara had never taken before. They climbed through pine forests and over rocky ridges until they reached a high meadow overlooking the entire valley. Below, their ranch was visible, the house a tiny square of light against the green. Beyond it, the valley stretched to distant mountains. "This is the north boundary of our land," Caleb said as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "I've been thinking about building a cabin up here someday, maybe for when the boys get old enough to want their own place. But for now, it's just ours. A place to come when we need to remember how far we've come." They spread blankets on the grass and unpacked the food, cold chicken and fresh bread and apple pie and sweet lemonade. The children ran wild through the meadow chasing butterflies and picking flowers, and being gloriously, noisily young. Clara and Caleb sat together watching them, shoulders touching, hands intertwined. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, Clara admitted. For someone to come and say it was all a mistake, that we can't be this happy. Nothing's going to go wrong, Caleb said. We've fought for this, Clara. We've earned it. And I promise you, I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you and those children know how loved you are. They're not just mine anymore, Clara said, looking at him. They're ours, our children. Our children, Caleb repeated, testing the words, savoring them. Our family. Samuel came running over, his face flushed with excitement. Papa, there's a stream over the ridge and I think there might be trout in it. Can we come up here to fish sometime? Papa. The word came so naturally now, without hesitation or uncertainty. Caleb's whole face lit up. Absolutely. We can make it a regular thing. Come up once a month, camp overnight, teach you all to fish properly. Even the girls? Rose called, having overheard. Especially the girls, Caleb confirmed. Everyone in this family should know how to catch their own dinner. The afternoon wore on in perfect contentment. They ate until they were full, then lay on the blankets watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. The children made up stories about what shapes they saw. Thomas fell asleep with his head on Caleb's chest. Margaret curled against Clara's side, her locket clutched tight in her small fist. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, painting the valley in gold and amber, Caleb stood and called the children together. I want to say something, he announced. All of you, come here. They gathered around, curious. Caleb looked at each of them in turn, his eyes shining with emotion. 4 months ago, I was alone. I'd been alone for 10 years because I was afraid to let anyone close, afraid to risk my heart again. I thought loneliness was safer than loss. He paused, his voice roughening. Then I saw your mother on that auction platform, saw you children clinging to her, and something in me broke open. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let you be separated or hurt or treated as less than the precious souls you are. Clara reached for his hand, squeezing tight. I'm not going to lie and say I knew what I was doing, Caleb continued. I had no idea how to be a father. I'd lost my daughter so long ago, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have children in my house. But you taught me. You showed me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up every day and choosing to love each other even when it's hard. It hasn't been hard, Rose said softly. Not yet, Caleb agreed. But someday it will be. Someday you'll all be older and you'll make mistakes and I'll make mistakes and we'll disagree about things. That's what families do. But I want you to know right now, on this day when you officially became mine, I will never stop choosing you. I will never stop fighting for you. I will never stop loving you. Samuel stepped forward and hugged him. Then Rose joined in, and the twins and Thomas, and finally Margaret. They clustered around Caleb in a tangle of arms and joy, and Clara saw her husband, because he was fully her husband now, in every way, close his eyes and hold them all as if they were the most precious things in the world, because they were. When they finally pulled apart, Clara stood and added her own words. I want you children to understand something too. You've been through so much, more than any child should have to endure. You lost your first father. You were sold by family who should have protected you. You had to learn to trust again when you had every reason not to. The children watched her, solemn and attentive. But you did it, Clara continued. You chose to be brave. You chose to give Papa Caleb a chance. You chose to believe in the possibility of being happy again. And because of that courage, we're all standing here today as a real family. I'm so proud of you, all of you. We're proud of you too, Mama, Samuel said. You kept us together when everything was falling apart. You protected us even when you were scared. We're all brave, little Helen announced. The whole family. That's right, Caleb agreed. The whole family. And together, there's nothing we can't face. They stayed in the meadow until the stars began to appear, reluctant to leave this perfect day behind. But finally, with children yawning and the air growing cool, they packed up the wagon and headed home. Home, the word had never felt so complete. As they rattled down the mountain track, Rose leaned against Clara and said quietly, Mama, I'm glad we came here. I'm glad everything happened the way it did. I know that's strange to say, but I am. Why's that, sweetheart? Because if my first papa hadn't died, if the Whitmores hadn't sold us, if Papa Caleb hadn't been at that auction, we wouldn't have this. We wouldn't be a family like we are now. Rose looked up at Clara. Does that make me a bad person? That I'm glad about the bad things because they led to good things? No, baby. That makes you human. Clara kissed her forehead. We can be grateful for where we ended up while still being sad about what we lost. Those feelings can exist together. I think my first papa would like Papa Caleb, Rose said thoughtfully. I think he'd be glad we found someone who takes such good care of us. I think so too. When they reached the ranch, the house looked different somehow. Warmer, more welcoming, more like it had always been meant to be filled with a large, noisy family. Caleb lit the lamps while Clara settled the younger children into bed. They were asleep almost before their heads hit the pillows, exhausted by excitement and fresh air. Samuel and Rose stayed up a little longer, sitting at the kitchen table with cups of warm milk, going over the events of the day in detail. Finally, they too headed to bed, but not before both hugging Caleb and Clara good night. Thank you for adopting us, Papa, Samuel said seriously. I know it wasn't easy or cheap, but I'm going to work hard and make you proud. I promise. You already make me proud, Caleb assured him, every single day. After the children were all settled, Clara and Caleb stood on the porch in the darkness, looking out over the valley. The ranch spread before them, peaceful and prosperous. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. The creek murmured its eternal song. Above, the stars blazed in their thousands. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked. I'm thinking about that auction, Clara said. About standing on that platform with no hope, no future, just fear and shame. And I'm thinking about how everything I thought was an ending was actually a beginning. A beginning, Caleb echoed. I like that. This life we're building, it's not what I planned. It's nothing like what I imagined when I was a young woman dreaming about marriage and family. Clara turned to face him. It's so much better. Because it's real. Because it's ours. Because we chose it. Caleb pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. I love you, Clara Rourke. More than I thought I could ever love anyone again. I love you too. Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, leather and wood smoke and home. Thank you for saving us. You saved me too, Caleb said. You and those beautiful children gave me a reason to live again instead of just existing. That's a gift I can never repay. You don't have to repay it. You just have to keep showing up, keep loving us, keep being the man you are. Clara looked up at him. Can you do that? For the rest of my life, Caleb promised, and kissed her. They stood together on the porch while the night deepened around them, two people who'd been broken by loss and remade by love. Inside the house, 6 children slept peacefully, dreaming of fish and adventures and a future that stretched before them bright and unafraid. The ranch settled into quietness, the animals bedding down, the mountains standing eternal watch. This was what happiness felt like, Clara realized. Not the absence of hardship or the guarantee of easy days ahead, but the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. As a family. As people who'd chosen each other deliberately and would keep choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. The lonely ranch that Caleb had built as a refuge from pain had been transformed into something vibrant and alive. A home filled with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of children growing up safe and cherished. The woman who'd stood terrified on an auction block had become someone strong and certain, building a future instead of just surviving. The children who'd clung to each other in fear now ran free, confident in their belonging. It wasn't a fairy tale. There would be hard times ahead, sick children and failed harvests and disagreements, and all the challenges that came with raising 6 young souls. But they would weather those storms together, their family forged in adversity and strengthened by choice. As Caleb and Clara finally went inside and closed the door against the night, a light burned in the window, a beacon against the darkness, a symbol of the warmth within. The valley held them close, this family built by courage and love, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, witnessing the quiet miracle of broken people becoming whole. This was their story, not an ending, but a beginning that would unfold across years and generations. A testament to the truth that family isn't always found in blood, but in the deliberate decision to love and be loved, to protect and be protected, To choose and keep choosing, day after day, year after year, forever. And in that small ranch house in a remote valley, surrounded by mountains and stars and the endless possibilities of tomorrow, the Rourke family settled into their new life together, complete, healed, and finally, irrevocably home.